All right. Good morning, all, and welcome to the Finance Committee. We've had a little bit of shuffling in the agenda, so you guys tell me, where did we end up? I see audit up on the screen, so I think Debbie's.
Sure. Yeah.
We had a bit of, and is everything still okay in terms of the lineup? I assume that we've got allowance for folks that need to be in other meetings. We all good to go?
Yes, Chair Scott, if I may.
Yes.
Yeah, so Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones. Yeah, we're moving Chief Audit Executive Davis up for her presentation on the section. You know, every month we have a section from the board come and provide their budget overview and how they're using the funding to support your strategic plan and or a portrait of a graduate.
Yep.
And then it'll be followed by action items, and Ben is here for the rule that follows. And then Angie will come in later in the agenda for the rule. So we're on time, on target, on track, and at your direction, sir.
Beautiful. Thank you much. So this is for those following, it's agenda item number 8 is now number 1. And Debbie, please go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair Moss. And I appreciate so much Finance Committee and all of the Finance Committee staff allowing me to go first so I can meet another obligation. Thank you. So Chief Audit Executive Debbie Davis, and I'm excited to just spend a few minutes with you talking about how internal audit supports the board's strategic plan. Okay, I want to make sure I'm on track with the slides. If you recall, back in January, internal audit got to present to the board on internal controls. We love talking about internal controls, as you are well aware. And I shared with you at that time kind of an analogy of Newton's cradle and how it helps me understand roles and responsibilities, and in those roles, how the board works to achieve its strategic plan. And it does that most directly by impacting LEAs, who impact schools, that impact classrooms with teachers, that directly impact students. And that's what the board is after, right? The success of students, that they're leading meaningful lives. That's what we're about. So how does internal audit do that? Well, internal audit, we have a strategic plan as well that cascades from the board's strategic plan. So our mission is AEIOU, analyzing education independently and objectively for Utahns. And the why, our vision, there's this direct tie to the board's strategic plan. It's to ensure, help ensure achievement of the board's strategic mission. And I'll talk more about a couple of specific ties to that in a few minutes, but everything internal audit does, we do it on the foundation of our core values. And our core values are efficiency, excellence, professionalism, integrity, and life balance. Those are very important to us, and we talk about them quite frequently. So again, those are the foundation, and we have 3 goals that we're working towards: operational excellence, cultural excellence, and internal audit leadership. With those 3 goals, we've developed some strategies and performance metrics with targets. And on a quarterly basis, we present to the audit committee on how we're doing, what's our progress, are we trending in the right direction? We're very aware that as a department, our performance, it kind of rests on what the individual staff are doing. So our strategic plan then cascades down to our employee performance plans. And so each performance plan for employees, and myself included, includes these 3 goals. And it includes tie-ins to our core values. Again, we want to talk about those a lot and make sure everybody's on the same page and we have alignment with what the board's doing. So you're getting the feel that staff is important to us. And as you look at our budget, which is this little tiny percent of the agency's budget, we're about 2%, I think, of the agency budget, 87% of that 2% of our budget is our staff. It's staff salary and benefits. And then you'll see another 10% or so is for the indirect cost pool, which allows us to help pay for the services we get from IT and financial operations. They help us with administrative tasks that we have. And then there's some, just even smaller percentages that it's hardware and software. It's paying for purchase services like the HR help we get. We pay for that. And then, of course, continuing professional education is important to us. And it's a standard that we're required to follow to make sure that we're maintaining and increasing our knowledge, our skills, our abilities so that we can serve the board. So that's kind of what our budget looks like. I want to talk a little bit more about staff, though, because it's such an important piece of what internal audit does and who we are. So in January, when we talked about internal controls, we talked about the control environment as the first component of internal control. And the control environment includes organizational structure. So you can see on this slide our organizational structure, which has a chief audit executive, deputy audit executive, and an audit director. And those two roles function as project supervisors. They run audits, they supervise consultations. Then we have 3 audit staff, and I'm very happy to report, you'll see there we have hiring in process. We have hired our auditor, and he'll start in a couple of weeks. We also have a hotline specialist and an administrative assistant. So that's what our organizational structure looks like. Another part of the control environment is making sure that we're hiring competent individuals to do the roles, the tasks, the assignments the internal audit has, so we can be successful in achieving our objectives. So I wanted to give you a feel for who are these people filling these positions. And so that's what this slide includes. And I'm not going to go through it in detail. It's there if you want to read it, but I wanted to reflect kind of the diversity that internal audit has and the experience and the background, the education that we have. We are a diverse internal audit shop if you compare us with other internal audit shops. And we think that's only to the benefit of our department and of the board, because education's diverse. It's important that we can come together and have robust discussions as we're talking about things. It's fantastic, and it's been working very well for us. So that's what this slide conveys, is just who's filling those roles, which is so important to the work of internal audit, and thus helping to support the board. So this is who we are, what we're doing, and I'll tell you, I have fantastic staff. They do great things. But the next slide is, what are those things we're doing, our critical tasks and functions of internal audit? And we've identified five generally. Of course, we do audits. That's our big thing that we're doing. And the board prioritizes and approves those audits before we work on them. There's also consultations, which includes technical assistance. And we provide technical assistance both internally and externally as requested. Another, of course, is the public education hotline. You're aware of that. We've presented on that in the past. We're the external audit on, meaning we have back channels, we keep those open, especially with legislative auditors and the state auditor's office, since they audit us frequently. But we want to make sure we have good relationships, that we're communicating well, that the audit process is smooth, that it's working well. So internal audit tries to facilitate that. And then the final one is risk assessment. We do kind of a formal risk assessment each year, and we talk about risk quite frequently with the audit committee. So those are the tasks and functions that your internal audit staff are doing. So I want to just circle back quickly to the board's mission, right? We're trying to support that. We're driving towards that objective, because that's what helps us get to helping students and student success. So the board's mission includes that the State Board of Education leads by creating equitable conditions for student success through advocating for necessary resources, developing policy, and providing effective oversight and support. And you can see I've outlined just a few things there, but I feel like those are a little generic. So I wanted to give you some flavor. So I thought I'd share a couple of examples of how internal audit is helping the board fulfill its strategic mission. So in 2018, as approved by the board, we did an audit of school fees. And you're very aware, probably, the outcome, the corrective actions that followed that audit included a task force, included a consultation project where internal audit really helped get things up and running. We helped with revisions to board rule and statute, and provided training and technical assistance to LEAs, all kinds of things, and now working on monitoring. Well, that function has just recently transitioned to fiscal operations, but before it did, or kind of right during this transition phase, we received a hotline, and it was from a grandma, and she was concerned because her grandchild, who was in her care, was attending kindergarten, like an all-day kindergarten or an extended day kindergarten, and there was a fee associated with it, and they could not pay the fee, and her grandchild, her student, had to quit the program. And he was so sad. He wanted to participate in kindergarten. And so our school fees team, with their expertise, kind of dug in, figured out, well, what are the facts? What are the circumstances of this situation? And, with that expertise, knowing the law, they were able to work with the school. It was a waivable fee, and this family qualified for a fee waiver. And when everybody understood what happened or what the law was, they were able to, work with the school. The school waived the fee, and this student was able to return to kindergarten. And I just thought, wow, that's so awesome that from this audit that we did in 2018 to gaining all this expertise that we were able to directly impact a student and make sure that that student was having the opportunity for education in this state. So that's one example. One other example is back in 2020, the board looked at amending R277113, right? One of our favorite rules, LEA fiscal and auditing policies, I think it is. And internal audit had the opportunity to provide some feedback on that rule. And one of the items that was included in that rule was a requirement for mandatory trainings of all LEA boards on audit committees. All LEAs are required to have an audit committee. And I think sometimes it's just, what's an audit committee? What do we do? And so in accordance with the board approving that rule, internal audit put together a training. The training went live in December of 2020, and we got the word out. We sent the newsletter, we sent emails, we notified LEAs, hey, there's this training that's now required, kind of short, but please look at it. And we found that shortly after we released that, LEAs jumped on it. They got right on it, and we started getting a few phone calls or emails from a business administrator or an audit committee chair, a board chair. Our LEAs want to comply. We all know that, but sometimes it's hard to understand how to do that. So we received those phone calls and were able to provide technical assistance to LEAs so they could get up and running. And I think this just improves governance overall in public education. So those are just two examples that help highlight how internal audit is striving with our critical functions to support the board in your strategic plan to help support our students be successful. So with that, you have any questions, anything you ever really wanted to know about internal audit, we would be happy to answer your questions.
Board members, any questions? I know your time is valuable. I'll just ask one, and this is 30,000 foot. Just, you mentioned the external liaison. Is there anything coming out of the ledge audits that is kind of, you know, got us thinking internally about, you know, what we're looking at and sort of that communication from outside piece? I know we've had a number of external audits, so just maybe a little bit about how that's kind of shaping what we're looking at internally.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess I would defer to the superintendency as well as far as kind of details on corrective action. But from an audit perspective, the legislative auditors have been doing, they're calling it this performance series. And when all said and done, it will be 7 audits that were intended to kind of comprehensively look at education. The first 3 audits were all about governance. And so I think as the board is looking to consider its strategic plan and get into, you know, hey, what's going on there? Does anything need adjusting? Consideration of those 3 audits will be important, I think, and just, well, where's the legislature coming from? It gives you a flavor of what they're looking at. And there were some recommendations in those reports about, you know, this collaboration with the legislature to make sure we're all on the same page. The later audits are a little more specific too. We've had teacher retention and they've looked at outcomes a little bit. And I think we're filling that space well. We're moving in the direction. Some things we'd already started recognizing, hey, there are things we can improve on. And so we're already working in that space. The next 2 audits that will come out in June are related to administrative costs. And I think those audits in particular will be very important to this committee. We're having good conversations, but there will be, the first audit will be about financial performance and the chart of accounts, and are we able to compare across LEAs? And then the second report is more, well, what are we spending on administrative costs? Is it reasonable? Is it necessary? And what are we getting for what we're paying with administration? And so they're looking at that and kind of trying to figure out what would the performance metrics be in that regard. So I think that's where the legislature is right now with that performance series audit. And then the one other audit, of course, that they're looking at is educator training and curriculum development. And I think the board's work with R277328, some of those things, I think the board and the legislature are both seeing, you know, maybe there's some things to look at here, move forward. And so we're in sync on that. And that audit won't come out until the fall, but that's kind of where things are with legislative audit.
Thank you. That's very helpful. The one on administrative cost does affect this committee in the sense that we're looking at the at least beginning stages of prioritizing legislative funding proposals, and that was one we've had the last couple of years on sort of a ad hoc basis. Do you know when we expect that audit?
Yes, right now they've told us we can expect the release of that audit in June. And right now the Legislative Audit Subcommittee is scheduled to meet June 14th. We should see a draft of the first audit in a week or so. So hopefully they're getting close, but that's anticipated. So June, July, but hopefully June.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. Any other questions?
No, Chair, I'd just like, as a member of the audit committee, I get to see this work firsthand, and I just want to extend my appreciation. The work is done thoroughly. Our questions are answered quickly. The communication is very clear. So I just want to share my kudos. So thanks, audit team.
Amen to that. And thank you, Debbie, for keeping us up to date on everything.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, appreciate that. If that wraps it, we can move on to our agenda item 1 on SOEP amendment.
I'll take the lead on that one, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you, Ben.
Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. Good to be with the committee this morning. There are a number of changes proposed to R277726, and if it's all right, I'll go through the major changes that are proposed, and then Corey Conth and Jennifer Thronson are here, and they can answer any questions that you may have. So there's about 5 major changes to point out in the rule. The first one, we're going to go to line 40, and it deals with the definition of eligible student for purposes of the SOEP. A few years back, the board voted to make that for eligible students grades 6 through 12, and staff is recommending that be changed to grades 7 through 12. This is done for 2 primary reasons at this point. First thing is the legislature a few years back changed the definition of middle school in the code. Generally, the code anticipates that the SOEP will be open to middle school and high school students. And under the way they've defined things in the code, middle school is to cover grades, I believe, 7 through 9 or 7 and 8. And then, so we wanted to be consistent with what the code anticipates in recent changes. The other major reason for that change is a financial one. My understanding is that the current funding allotted for SOEP is not covering all the demand. The staff feeling is that if we change that from grade 6 to grade 7, they'll be able to better prioritize students who should have access to that given the current funding level. So that's the first change recommended. Is you'll see that change made in a couple of places in the rule. The next thing that we're recommending is, if you look at what used to be section 3, this basically was a section that the superintendent prepares applications for the different providers. And previously we've incorporated these specific applications in the rule. What staff is asking for us to do is to have the committee and the board approve striking that language. And instead you'll see on lines 235, you'll see language, I'll go down there, where essentially the rule would give the superintendent the authority to create those applications and make them available for providers at the LA level, higher education level, and for certified online providers. And then it gives some guidelines for what the superintendent should take into account in creating those applications and reviewing those applications. So that would replace essentially section 3, instead of having those applications prescriptive and having to come to the board for the specific applications every time. It would allow staff to handle that and make changes more nimbly and more when as needed. Next major change you're going to see is going to be on lines 521. Get down there. This deals with the funding to small schools, and talks about restricting the proportionate share of the small school allocation and how funding should go for small schools, especially if there's extra money available. Jennifer and Corey can answer any questions you may have on that. And then the final major change that we have in the rule is the very end of the rule, starting on lines 579. For the first time, we're going to now have SOEP open to concurrent enrollment courses. That has not, that's been allowed by code, but hasn't been done in the past. However, between the rule and statutory schemes for SOEP and the statutory scheme for concurrent enrollments, there are a few different provisions that kind of conflict. And so we've included this language just to show that for when a student is enrolled in a concurrent enrollment course through an SOEP provider, if there's a conflict in the different provisions of code and rule, the concurrent enrollment code is going to prevail in those cases. There's like 3 or 4 conflicts there, things like when a student can withdraw from a course and different things like that, kind of administrative provisions that differ between SOEP and concurrent enrollment. So those are the major changes that are in the rule. There are a few other technical changes to help administer the program, but we'd be happy to answer the questions you have about the proposed changes.
Thank you very much, Ben. Any questions? I see Vice Chair Norton's hand up. Oh, you're on mute, Kristen.
Sorry about that. I do have a question about that last portion that we talked about, starting on line 521. And I was just wondering if you can give me some background as to why we're restricting the small schools. I think that they are so heavily impacted with the limitations of hiring and, course availability in these smaller schools, that, boy, if they had somebody that wanted this, I would hate to have them taken out because of a funding priority, allowing other people in when, this is an area that just is in great need of these online courses.
Corey or Jennifer?
You want to?
Is Corey available? I'm trying to
I
yield.
think she's trying to
her
talk,
power.
but she's on mute.
Corey, are you on mute?
Yes, I was. So
Thank you.
this is Dr. Corey Kant. I'm the statewide online education program specialist for the State Board of Education in the teaching and learning section. And first, I'd just like permission to respond, if that's okay.
Please do. Thank you, Corey.
Okay. So essentially what we're trying to do with the language that we have put into rule is allow some latitude for the board, some ability for the board to prioritize that funding between schools and, schools that qualify, because there are no restrictions set on a very limited pot of funding. And so far, what we've heard, the feedback we've heard from our superintendents of small schools is they probably don't want this language in here. So we will be meeting any restrictive language. So we will be meeting with them over the summer through URSA and so on in, the Utah Rural Schools Association meetings in June or July. And we may take out that language. But right now, the feeling was, if you've got a limited pot of money and a lot of students that are eligible, that may be used up very quickly, especially by some schools. That's number one. But number two, the reason we prioritize this funding, if necessary, if we get to a point where that funding is being drawn down very quickly. This just is very similar to the measures we've taken with home and private school funding. This would allow us to prioritize seniors or other students that are graduating in the current year. And it will also allow us to prioritize high cost courses, which are our APC, concurrent enrollment, and language arts, math, and science courses. So basically, we're saying you have a lot of students from these schools that are going to be applying for courses. Which, if funds are limited, which costs would you have us cover first? Maybe the high cost courses first, because the other courses will be shifted into the general funding stream and uncovered by this legislative funding. So does that answer the question?
That helps a lot. And I like that you're focusing on urgent needs before, oh, it would be nice if I had this that I could do from home. So yeah, I understand that and I appreciate that. But I also like that you're going to be meeting with these rural schools that I know just push so hard to get these SOEP courses and more availability. And I guess it also just shows us all that this needs to continue to be a priority. And, moving forward in legislation, we should be looking at this pretty closely if this is, if this need continues to grow. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Corey. And I saw Director Thronson's hand. Oh, now it's down. Okay. Holding on that. Okay. I think next up then was Member Hart.
Yes, I have a question about a change that wasn't addressed on line 188. It's talking about including appropriate student coursework completed prior to grade 9. What was the need for that change?
Ben, you might want to speak to this. This is a language change that you included, and I think this is just a clarification of a process that already exists.
Then go
Ben,
ahead.
could
if
you?
you'd like to.
Yeah.
My understanding, and Corey and Jennifer can correct me if I'm wrong, but there are opportunities for students in middle school to complete high school courses as part of their SOE, their plans towards graduation prior to high school, and then those grades would be included as part of their high school transcript because they count towards high school graduation. And so I think that's in another rule, if I recall correctly, and I think this is it's attempting to help facilitate that. Am I on the right track, Jennifer?
I see a nod, Director Thronson.
I
Is
guess
that all we need? Okay.
I guess I have a more specific question then. Chair, is that okay?
Yes, please.
So are you saying that coursework counts for both credit and hours towards graduation?
There are limited provisions in another rule, and I can't remember which rule it is off the top of my head, but there are limited provisions that allow a student, if it's part of their is it their SOEP plan? I'm trying to remember the plan that it's part of, but
CCR.
What's that?
There's CCR.
There you go. The CCR plan, that if they have that worked out, they can take middle school student can take courses that count towards graduation, and so this would attempt to facilitate giving credit for that on the transcript.
Can someone send me that? I realize it doesn't need to take up committee time, but I'd like to.
I'll make sure you get that, Molly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I have other questions, Chair, but I'll wait.
Jennifer?
700.
That rule 700.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, perhaps to the full committee, if you could, that'd be.
I'll send that and highlight the relevant portions for the committee.
Thank you.
Chair, I have some other questions, but I'll let other people ask some more.
Okay, we've got Chair Huntsman, then Member Hutchings, and back to Vice Chair Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got just two. One's a really simple question, and then I've got one that's more complex. Is there a rush on this rule? Is this a timing issue?
I know that we want to have the changes in place for the next school year. So that would be the primary timing issue, is that if we want to have those in place we need to get the board to approve it in June and then have it published and all that good stuff.
So my biggest concern here is about, as I'm looking at this change, about priority. We, in the presentation here, and then I also see it in here, there's, because of demand, we want to take 6 out and have it 7 to 12. And then if funds are available, then small schools have a chance at it. And of course, the small schools aren't going to like where this is going. But then in the same breath, we're looking at doing more or improving the situation for concurrent enrollment. This is what I'm getting. And I'm sitting there going, isn't our number one priority our 7 through 12 regular courses and small schools and concurrent enrollment? Can somebody speak to how concurrent enrollment is now a higher priority in this space for 7 to 12 when we're looking at other courses that?
May I speak to that one, Chair?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So Jennifer Thronson, Director of Teaching and Learning. And with respect to concurrent enrollment, it doesn't prioritize out. So the small schools is its own funding source. So this allows small schools to access the SOEP course list more fully and not lose some of their FTE, but also they can have access to concurrent enrollment courses. Concurrent enrollment is being added to the program as a whole. So it's going to be added to any of the public school students, as that is an eligibility requirement to be able to have access. Many of our online schools already offer concurrent enrollment, but they're not able to offer it to SOEP students participating in their school. They can only offer it to their home students. So Mountain Heights Academy, for example, they offer concurrent enrollment, but they're not allowed to put SOEP students in there until now, as we've been working with USHE to update that. And in terms of timing is critical for this one. We've got applications for new programs, some of that to be able to make those decisions in a timely fashion. And second, we did run the rule through the SOEP working group, which has superintendent from Morgan and superintendent from GUAB on that committee, and they were in agreement with the rule right now as it is to proceed on. They didn't have any major hesitations, but they did encourage that conversation at URSA, which we've been able to schedule for July 8th to meet with all the rural superintendents and to be able to have this conversation and figure out where would they like the priorities to lie. Where we put them on is on core classes. So when we're talking about English language arts, those are core classes. Those are a higher cost course. They're also CE classes are a higher cost course. So what Corey has prioritized would meet most likely what those recommendations would be, but it will be an opportunity for us to get feedback. And if we need to bring you an amended draft in the August full board with that, modification, we certainly could and still keep this on timeline for approval.
So kind of just a quick follow-up, if I could, Mr. Chair.
Please.
I know there's other questions in here. So why don't we expedite the process for our June meeting if this moves out of committee and it goes to June for approval? Why don't we bring our proposed amendments?
We certainly could.
Because that's what I'm going to seek when this. There's no question this has to move out of committee, but whether staff moves in that direction or so we should be pretty responsive. So to stay in alignment with the applications and everything, we should bring our A game to June.
Yeah, it's difficult to get those superintendents together in time. We've been working with Lexi and saying when would be best. They have a June retreat for 3 days, but it's after board meeting. And so it's just a timing issue. For the applications, we need that more urgently. For the funding part will be done, even if we bring it back. It will be in place before they actually would have issues of running out of funding. Generally, we anticipate making it through first semester before we run out of funding in preparation for second semester. So we'll have time to make any adjustments to the language, but the working group felt good about what was there right now when we met last week, because we want, that working group that you guys have organized as a board, we go to them and vet the rules and everything through, and they didn't have any major hesitations on what's in there right now or need for a change, but the opportunity to engage and help people to know their opportunity and what's available, and to have the discussion of, do we put a cap on an LEA, because there might be one LEA who's really ready and takes up all the money potentially, and another LEA that would like to join, but the other LEA was kind of ready to go. So there was that conversation that the rural superintendents brought up. Both Doug Jacobs and Cody Hughes were talking about that in our last meeting together. So I would love that everything shook out correctly. And if you all want to hold the rule, we certainly can. But it's the application season for new SOEP providers, and to be able to move those through more quickly and to be able to be responsive to those applications is the timing of this request.
Thank you.
That answer it, Chair Huntsman. Okay. Member Hutchings.
I would like to make a motion that the committee approve R277726 draft 1 on the first reading and forward to the board for approval on the second and final reading.
Okay, discussion of that motion. I saw Member Norton, Vice Chair Norton, and Member Hart's hands up. You want to address the motion then?
Could I speak to the motion?
I'm sorry, of course.
That's okay. I really appreciate the dialogue. Working at a small school that would qualify for this, that we've been talking about this additional funding. I am super excited about it. I think the rural schools are excited about it. And it sounds like we just need to work out some of the administrative procedures to make sure that it's fair. And let's move this along so that they have access to it, so kids can be enrolling and schools can use it. I do want to make the clarification, and this is how I think this has been said, but I just want to make sure it's clear. If, as far as this funding goes, it doesn't limit that students from these schools can take classes or not. It just limits where the funding comes from, whether it comes through this special fund that's been created, or if it comes through the school's WPU, how we've always been paying for it. So it doesn't limit the student's ability or the school's ability, the student's ability to take the class or the school's ability to offer the class. There's some process as far as funding that needs to be worked out. And so with that in mind, I think we should keep it moving and make sure that's available, and they can work out some of those administrative questions as we go. Super excited also about the concurrent enrollment that small schools could now potentially offer their students that they couldn't previously. So I think this is a great opportunity for many students and schools.
Thank you, Member Hutchings. So the motion is pending. We don't need a second, but we have a couple of hands that might have either speak to the motion or a question. Back to, I can't remember who was in line first, Molly or Kristen?
Kristen.
Okay, Vice Chair Norton.
Yes. First of all, I would have to respectfully disagree with the thoughts that we need to get this moving right along. I think when we consider that, we've already put a hold on it because we're going to be meeting on this possibly in June, and then also including superintendent's feedback, which comes in July. We're not going to have providers that are then ready in August already. We've already missed that ship has sailed for this particular year. I don't see us rolling out a policy in July and then having providers August 1st ready to enroll students. So I think we're looking at this for next year any way we do that. I could be wrong, but I think that that's going to be a pretty rapid rate for anybody to work. Also, I would like to go back and this is possibly, this applies to this rule, but I also think it's something that maybe we need to talk to staff to start working on legislatively, this issue with 6th grade and 7th grade. More and more and more, we are seeing 6th graders in the secondary setting. And maybe it's time for us to address that with the legislature and ask them to consider 6th grade as part of the secondary group so that they could be included in secondary funding. And for our advanced students, that starts in kindergarten, but for SOEP programs and et cetera, they need it sooner than later. So I think sixth grade, when they start getting more diversification in classes that they can take, some of these advanced kids need to be, in higher advanced classes, and they need to have opportunities to take these. So I would think that it's about time for our board to consider that and consider asking the legislature to classify sixth graders as secondary students. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Norton. And did that include some form of amendment or just speaking to the timeliness of whether to go now or to go?
Well, yeah, I would like to.
A response is not to go, or an option is not to go earlier, which we are here. Here we are. But to your point of the timing on this, are you proposing an amendment or just speaking to the?
Well, I'm speaking to on line 40 to taking that back to sixth grade.
Right.
And then I would like to, I hate to take this to the board and then turn around and ask to change it again in July when we talk to the superintendents. Like, I'm wondering, why are we in a rush to get it to the board in June? Maybe this is better for August.
Perhaps Director Thronson, and we do have a motion.
Yes, thank you. That's a great idea.
I'm also, concerned that we're not able to get the full feedback we need until July, given kind of the prevalence of Zoom meetings these days. And I love Ursa, but given some of the concerns expressed, is there an opportunity to raise this before so we can be ready to go in June? I'm not sure.
And on that same notion, yes, those students still have the opportunity to take it, but these are, these rural schools, their WPU is not quite as robust as some of these others. There's not as much wiggle room for them to just, to just fund all of these. It's a pretty heavy lift for them to do what they're doing. And so, I can't just say, oh yeah, they've got a huge need for it, but they don't have a huge pot of money for it, anything.
Here, may I respond?
Yeah, yes, please. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, I just want to remind you, we do vet this through the SOEP working group. So these are not all our ideas. So sixth grade was actually part of the conversation. They believed it should go. As providers and LEAs, they did not want sixth graders participating. Their experiences, they're not as successful in the program and didn't feel like they should be. And so as we were confronting financial issues, they actually recommended that sixth grade not be engaged and not seek legislation. It was actually one of our agenda items on our SOE working group. So there's not support from the working group, and they're representing your Superintendents Association, your School Boards Association, and others on that, and SOEP providers. So just wanted to bring the context of the group that you have kind of feeding the board in terms of perspective. And then money-wise, we do need to find those priorities. We can try and engage sooner with the superintendents and get a sampling. But again, the Superintendents Association is represented with three members on our group, and their time, they reviewed the rule. They didn't have any problems with what's in the current rule.
All right, thank you. Member Hart had a question.
Yeah, I have a little bit of heartburn. First of all, I agree that we need to look at the statute about sixth graders. Whether or not that ends up changing this, I don't know. That's a second step, but it's a problem the way it's identified, and it's not just with this. So I would concur with more conversation around that issue, even separate from SEOP, but also obviously it would have an implication. I am wondering about lines 243 through 248, and I just want to hear a little bit more before I decide whether or not how I want to vote on this. I feel like this is very nebulous. I mean, I understand the thought behind it. I understand the need, but I'm uncomfortable with it seems rather arbitrary. Can someone speak to how we might put this into practice and what kind of measures we would use to ensure fairness and equity and that kind of thing?
Somebody want to respond to that, and maybe I can just piggyback on that, because I had a similar question. As I recall, there were criteria for review. First of all, inclusion in the program, and then yearly review to determine whether they could stay in the program. And I don't have it in front of me, but it seemed to be a bit more precise than the language in 247, that the provider demonstrates repeated low performance, which is not defined. So I share that question. I see Director Thronson's hand up. Did you want to respond to that?
Yes, I'll start and then Corey will have the full details, but I'll just give you an example. We had a school express interest, or LEA, and they have 7% proficiency rates in English language arts, math, and science in those single-digit numbers. We do not feel comfortable expanding their opportunities to kids across the state, given they are not meeting the needs of their local community with 7%. So that is what this is trying to get at, is we need clearer, how do you get into the program? And if you come in ready, awesome. But we have some people that are not quite ready to come into the program, and our current regulations don't really prevent us from being able to say, are you financially and academically ready to enter into this space? And so that is what Corey's trying to put into place here, some guardrails that allow staff to look at their, she has a great word for it, but capability, she's got a better word.
Capacity.
Ready for this. So Corey, do you want to speak? Because you do this on a daily basis, and I think can give a better example.
Sure. Do I have permission to speak, Chair?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Corey.
Okay, so yes, there are two elements that are going to determine capacity. One is financial capacity, and for LEAs, when we're thinking of school districts, that's not usually a problem. But when we are thinking of charter schools, quite often that is a problem. And for instance, just thinking of the past, some of the providers that we've had apply have been financially stressed to the point that they had problems providing programming and services and so on to their own students. And ultimately those schools who applied and were even providers for a limited time because we couldn't refuse them were closed.
So Corey, I don't mean to interrupt. I completely understand and I completely agree with the premise. I'm asking, 7%, obviously that would be a very low, but when you get into the higher numbers, are you using a rubric? Are you using standards? I support the idea, they have to have the capacity, but how are you judging that capacity?
Okay, so Member Hart, I believe you're speaking more to the instructional capacity in that case. And there we are working with Dr. Jimmy Hernandez, who is our, the data specialist that has been working with us. And he's attempting to provide a set of norms for the population as a whole for academic performance. So that's based on state standardized testing and just if you think of a bell curve, most of the population would fit right in the middle. We're all performing well, but then you have some outliers maybe on the low end that are performing poorly. And Dr. Hernandez is trying to provide us with, set criteria that would tell us who's falling into that very low end of the population.
Okay.
Any follow-up, Member Hart?
I'd just like clarification. The motion would be, and what Chair Huntsman was speaking to was moving this forward, and then any amendments would actually be at the full board meeting rather than bringing it to committee and then extending it another. I just want to make sure that's what I'm understanding. Okay.
Any
Thanks.
response to that? I'm not
Well,
sure who.
Stacy's shaking her head,
I
so
guess, yes, the maker of the
Okay.
motion, Chair Hutchings, did you want to address how
Yes,
you see that fitting into the motion?
that's the idea, yes.
okay, thanks.
The idea being that between now and June going to the full board, we would try to address some of these questions that are floating.
Exactly.
And Chair Huntsman has a hand up.
Yeah, if we can get it resolved, and I'm not sure if we have confidence that we can have it resolved by June. The other, I see two opportunities. One is to move it to the full board with a proposed amendment or an additional draft or a proposed amendment, or the motion fails and somebody makes a motion to bring it back in June to our meeting in June. But then I'm not sure if we'll get all of the answers or concerns addressed. So those are the two routes I see, but.
Director Thronson has a hand up.
Yes, thank you. I see a third route. So one, we can do our best to see if we can get those superintendents together between now and June and have that draft amendment. If it's not possible, if the board holds the rule in June because we're not able to, and we bring it back in August, it still lets us meet timelines and is acceptable that way. That would be my, it's a backup option. So I'm just trying to be creative here with y'all today as one way of saying, let's go for June. If we can get it done, awesome, you guys will consider it. And if we can't get it done, we'll come, well, you guys would hold it and then we would come back in August for the full board. That might be one way to meet in the middle.
Chair Huntsman, does that procedure work? That would be,
Yeah.
I assume, in the hands of leadership to decide whether it's ready for June board meeting or whether it goes back to committee.
When it comes out of here, it's going to the full board. And then if it's not, if we don't have a proposed draft in place, then it's at the mercy of the board to act on it or move it. But if it doesn't get votes to move forward, then it could come back in August. It could come back in a committee, or it could come back as a separate item before the full board. Those are all options and opportunities. And a process.
Member Hutchings again?
I believe I have two questions, if I could.
Please.
So first, the funding stream that's been created for the small schools, is that accessible by small schools if we don't pass this? Corey, yes, it is. Okay, so that's good to know. We're not waiting on this in order to be able to access that. Okay, that's important. I'm thinking of timeline too. If we wait and if we wait until August to pass it, then do we have, I guess my question is, are students in schools waiting for this to pass in order to know they can sign up for these classes? Or no, you're saying no. So concurrent, but for the concurrent enrollment, yes.
This is the trick, right? May I speak, Chair?
Yes,
the concurrent enrollment part is a little sensitive. We are moving into that space. And so if this isn't in here, our SOEP providers could put kids at risk in terms of there's a different timing for dropping your enrollment in concurrent enrollment than there is in SOEP. That's just for one example. There's 3 or 4 places that CE gets a little muddy with what SOEP code and rule is. And so having the clarity in the rule of which one you listen to for the sake of students is why we wanted to be really clear in this rule. So Board Member Hutchins, I think you're striking a chord with me around one of the other reasons for hoping to push this, but also get it hopefully will be ahead of when people register kids and their drop times because it's a shorter window. It's 20 days in SOEP and I think it's 10 in CE. And so we're just leaving kids up for a risk of getting an incomplete if they don't drop early enough because they've been counseled differently in SOEP. And we're just trying to prevent harm to children with those kinds of conditions.
Okay, last question. From your experience with these providers, do you think they would be ready? My experience with many of the providers that are already providers and already offering concurrent enrollment classes, as soon as it's passed, they can provide it, they're ready. It's not like they're going to have to scramble to put these classes together and get them approved. Once this is approved, they'd be ready.
Sorry, may I respond, Chair?
Please.
Yes, so most of the providers are ready. We've got a couple that are like, we're going to offer a couple classes, where others that were already offering concurrent enrollment. This just opens the number of students that are eligible to take those courses in their community. So Mountain Heights, Utah Online, they already have concurrent enrollment classes, for example, and now they can offer it to all of their students instead of a subset of their students.
Member Hart?
Yeah, while I don't like being rushed. I wish that we didn't have situations where we did have that element. I do see the benefit of moving expeditiously, expediently. I don't know, whatever. But so if it moves forward to June, I don't see any harm in the full board looking at it and making a decision. I think we've kind of pinpointed where some points of stress are. We can still pull this back in June if we need to. So I see the benefits of moving it forward to the full board and having these issues addressed there if the full board considers them relevant. So I speak in favor.
If I may suggest one other thing too.
Please, Ben.
I don't see where to raise my hand where I'm screen sharing. I'm sorry, but
Gotcha.
the one other option the committee may consider, especially if the committee's primary concern is us getting feedback on this small schools piece, is I think we could easily remove lines 521 through 527 and bring that back at a later time if the committee's comfortable moving the rest forward to the full board. I think from what Corey indicated in her initial comments, we can get the feedback on that later and make changes on that later if the committee would rather remove that particular language, and then we could move the rest of the changes forward.
So that would take an amendment. I guess, the options are then to keep that in with the understanding that we've got a couple of moving pieces on this rule that we intend to address between now and June, and that we would hope to include more superintendent feedback. I appreciate Director Thronson's point that the SOEP committee includes that. There has been communication from the field. We're looking at a follow-up to make sure that any concerns they have been addressed. I would hope that could be that they could weigh in by June if they're aware that this is kind of moving forward. If that's the way the vote goes, that they have an opportunity to weigh in. So I guess I'll just put that out there to members. Anybody want to take that up as an amendment, or are we ready to move forward with what we have and with the explanation of the procedural possibilities going forward? Member Hart, you have a hand up. Is that still?
Oh, no.
Okay.
But I'm good moving forward.
Okay, so let me just make one comment. I am concerned about lines 247, 248 not having specificity on what it means to be low performance, and I think we need to probably move along because we got the big agenda. But my recollection, and maybe we can visit this between now and June, is that we previously, when we allowed out-of-state providers, we also added criteria for allowance into the program and then oversight. And my recollection, at least, was that had a bit more specified criteria, so that we don't have folks coming in with the general ability to exclude for quote repeated low performance. I just think we need to put some meat on that bone if that's what we're going to hold people to. So at this point, I'm not making an amendment because I think we've got several things that we hope to revisit. I'm just throwing that out there as a concern or a question. But if there are no further comments or questions, let's go ahead and vote on the motion. And Member Hutchings, did you want to restate that? Or I guess I should. Do we have, I think.
I can put it on the
Well,
screen.
you stated, I just need to restate it. I think the motion as stated, presented by Member Hutchings is, thank you, that the committee approve R277-726 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Members, please vote. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you all for the explanation. We look forward to following up on that one.
Thank you.
Appreciate your efforts to move that along. All right, back to our agenda. We're looking at action item number 2, the school building revolving loan review and approval recommendation. Who's running us on that one?
Chair Hunts or Chair Moss, if I may.
Thank you. Yes, Deputy Superintendent Jones.
Okay. Just real quick. So Brett Balatzar is our lead on this process, and what the process entails is periodically we receive applications for funds from the school building revolving account. It is a restricted account within the Uniform School Fund. It is a short-term loan program to help school districts meet district needs for school building construction and renovation. Without going word for word, essentially the code requires that the superintendent, public instruction, put together a committee made up of representation from the office and from the field, which we did. And that committee then makes a recommendation to you, the finance committee, to ultimately make your recommendation to the board, and the board has final say, has final approval and direction on this loan program. So the process we take is in accordance with code. It's at the direction of the superintendent. If you'll recall, we did, like I said, we did assemble the committee. We recorded the committee meeting, and I emailed the link to all of the finance committee members of the committee. So hopefully all of you saw that. Our interest was only to allow for the opportunity, because if you did have the opportunity to look at it, you could see that we spent over an hour, within the committee doing it, trying to answer questions. I did ask some obvious questions like, when do they want the loan to start, which was glaringly in front of me right on the page. But our intent is again with that. This really only comes up about every 5 years. So this is my second iteration of this process since I was there. Since I've been in this position about 7 years now. So with that, Chair, we'll turn it over to you and the committee for any questions. And then if there are questions or any concerns, I'd ask that you would identify Brett to address or answer those, since he's the lead on this great process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and I appreciate making that available. I was able to listen to a lot of it. I have a question, but Vice Chair Norton has a hand up first.
You're mute, Kristen.
Oh, sorry, still mute.
What a day, what a day. It's Friday morning. I also wanted to thank the Finance Committee for sending this link. It was immensely informative, and I appreciated to see the process and thought it was very thorough. I am very comfortable with the application and the vetting of the entity that has requested the loan. I am ready to make a motion, but I know Chair Moss said he's got some questions, so I will wait on that motion.
Well, honestly, I'll just make a comment. I had a bit of discussion as well about the background of the particular applicant here and their credit worthiness and prior lending, and I appreciated that. So unless any other members have questions, I'll turn it back to Vice Chair Norton for a motion.
Okay, I move that the Finance Committee recommend the USB approve the school building revolving loan application during the June 2022 board meeting.
Members, please vote. And that appears to be unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Superintendent Jones. Okay, item number 1.3. We are on to the fiscal year 2024 budget formulation process for the 2023 general session of the legislature. And I appreciate all the backup we were provided as we approach this agenda item. I believe Deputy Superintendent Jones has taken the lead on this one.
Yes, sir. So as background, and coming out of the what we've all identified, or what many have identified as a successful legislative session in the sense of the funding levels that were received. So much gratitude to our colleagues and team in the legislature for their work and their efforts in funding public education. Also, though, we did receive feedback from numerous board members that asked, isn't there a process that we could take that is more driven from the very beginning by the board, in the sense of that the board, by way of a process, establishes well, ultimately what become your priorities are established at the direction of you, so that staff are creating the business cases or justifications for the funding that ends up by law having to go in front of the governor first. That occurs in October or after your October meeting, so that he or she can make the proposal to the legislature in accordance with the Budgetary Procedures Act that you see here, or excerpted here. As you know, even after that process, or the submission to the governor's office that we have to meet by law, we continue or follow on at the board's direction with the legislature into that next legislative session with your priorities or with your requests for funding for public education. Now, that's in addition to the funding levels that are required by law, i.e. Amendment G, HB 357, the inflationary adjustment to the WPU, et cetera. What staff have come up with is this process where it starts here with you in the Finance Committee, where if you determine that this is the direction that you want to go, that you as the Finance Committee can review the outcomes of last general session, the requests that were made by the board, how those requests or those priorities came out. You had 11 priorities. We'll get into that here in a minute. And then make recommendations to the full board during their June meeting on what you would like to see staff pursue. And so that the full board can not only take your recommendations, but also add on to those, so that, because the board doesn't meet in July, staff have the opportunity to prepare for the full board meeting in August with essentially what's been directed or identified by you first here in the Finance Committee, then the board as a whole in June. We work on those business cases, right, at your direction over that July month. That would be great, because you're not meeting, and that gives staff a lot of time to analyze and provide that for an initial look by the board on the priorities that you've set by way of this process that we're introducing, because we listen to you, we listen to the board members saying, how can we create a process where it's more board driven on with process. Then subsequently in your August, September, and then your October meeting, we continue as staff to work at your direction on what funding requests you want made, or that go before the governor, by way of the law that you see here. And then ultimately too, what gets presented as part of the legislative process. This way, because another piece of feedback we got from multiple board members is that feeling of being rushed, right? That hey, there's this prioritization effort that's going on. It's the September board meeting. We got to do this by October. So we wanted to start this process a lot earlier with you, with the Finance Committee. We ran it by leadership. So this is just an iterative attempt. It's not here too. Staff aren't trying to say, well, this has got to be where it starts, or this is just a way of listening to you and then taking your direction on what ultimately leads into the great opportunity we have with the legislators for funding requests during the 2023 legislative session that sets public education funding for fiscal year 24. Also here today is Chief of Staff Young, because there's this a lot of board members say the same thing, fund the plan. You know, you have portrait of a graduate. So we'd encourage you to, as you identify potential funding requests that you want staff to work on, Dr. Young is here to make sure that, you know, we can answer questions or, you know, help this process along and support US staff. And I emphasize that word support. It's your direction, it's your lead, with, you know, ideas or clarity or on anything related to your strategic plan and or portrait of a graduate. So with that, Chair, what I'd like to do at your direction is go ahead and pull up the backup that demonstrates where we're at or where we came out of the last legislative session with your requests and the programs that were funded or funded at different levels. Now, I won't, you should be familiar with this. This is not the first time that you've seen this. You know, as you know, Sam, Dale, they do a great job of keeping track of, you know, your requests right from the get-go, and then ultimately providing this summary of not only, you know, what you proposed, what the governor proposed, and then what Public Education Appropriations Committee proposed to EAC, and what the final was related to all your requests, but then essentially your USBE funding priorities. So then the top part is those funding items, you know, enrollment growth, that WP value increase for inflation that's mandated by law, that at risk, and then the USDB educator salary adjustments. Those are all driven by law. That's driven, you know, the USDB educator salary adjustments have to occur. That's that as an example, because that's driven by law. Then there are your USB funding priorities from last general session, the 2022 general session. And you had 11 priorities. You can see those here. You asked for a WPU value increase, the at-risk WPU add-on, full day kindergarten, reduce the curricular and co-curricular fees, and on down. I won't go, you know, 1 through 11 with you, but I just want to orient it to you. Then there were additional funding requests that you had, or business cases. So those are all listed here. And then we also kept track of what other funding items came out of EAC or legislation in itself. You know, what legislators asked for or, you know, requested as part of the process the great process that we have inside and within the legislature. So again, our intent is just to provide to listen to you, to take your direction, to start this process here in Finance Committee, with the intent that you would identify some or many funding requests for the full board to vet in June, and then they can expand or add on or clarify so that staff have that summer time period to work with the intent to really get in front of the full board in August with your direction and with your priorities. First here in Finance Committee and then the full board in June. So with that, Chair, staff are available to answer any questions and concerns you may have with this process, and we can go from there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Superintendent Jones. And I think this is a terrific opportunity to get out in front, to take stock, you know, not too far downstream from the end of the session. Hard to believe it was less than 2 months ago. And I think, you know, we're absorbing, we appreciate the bill book that came out from Deputy Superintendent Stallings. We've all been digesting that. We've had some discussions about policy issues like SOEP that also have a bearing on funding priorities. So I think this is a great opportunity. Let me just ask this, Deputy Superintendent Jones. I think we are getting out ahead of the game by setting this up for June and then August. I would assume that if some of what comes out of today might be requests for information, that those could also be brought back to committee in June for inclusion on the August full board agenda, giving us kind of a chance to do some exploration and then some, you know, specific action items in June, having gotten the process going, and maybe some action items are actually on the board's consideration for June. Does that sound consistent with kind of how you see this going?
Absolutely, sir. You know, not only we want the opportunity to ask or to answer questions that you may have or requests for information that helps you in your decision-making process on what should go forward. So it's not only asking you for funding requests, but then asking for that, what other information do you need on programs or funding levels or things like that, so that when the time comes and over, the span of say August through October, we're answering those questions so you don't feel as rushed and that you have the information that you need to make an informed decision on what to request, how much to request, etc. So yes, short answer is yes, sir. Absolutely.
Thank you. And this is, I think, a great service to the board that Deputy Superintendent Jones set this up this way. So I see a couple hands. I think I saw Member Hart first and then Vice Chair Norton, but correct me if I'm off.
I think it was the other way around.
There you go.
Kristen, you want me? Okay. So I've got some thoughts and I'm just going to throw them out there because this is a new process and I'm not wanting to step on toes. I'm not wanting to, but I do have some thoughts just to get this moving. So things that I'd like to throw out on the table, transportation. And the reason for that is districts are trying to be innovative. I can see that in a number of initiatives and ideas that they have, but it seems like the tail wags the dog in this case, and they're often limited by transportation. And I know it's not sexy, and I know it's not fun to thump our chest and say we funded transportation this year, but it is an impediment to districts, and it's been an impediment for a long time. So that's something I'd like to throw out there. At-risk add-on, throw that out there because, we can't keep asking districts to pit one student's needs against another. And it's almost feels like a rob Peter to pay Paul kind of situation. And that really doesn't sit well with local communities. When programs have to be cut for other programs, I don't like pitting one part of a system against another. So I think that should be thrown out there. Market adjustments, there doesn't really need to be said much else for that. We just keep bleeding people, and with that comes institutional knowledge and the ability to implement programs to fidelity and keep our trust in our system in Utah. Educator time, it's been a really interesting year. I would, at the beginning and still now, I'd say as an educator, wearing my other hat, I would say this is the most difficult year I've ever had, hands down. But lately, things have really been looking up. And one of the big things that my teachers are so excited about are, and not just mine, but teachers that I talk to outside of the ones that I work with directly, is the additional time to do the things that everybody wants them to do. And if we're going to demand every bit of transparency that possibly can be offered, then we have a responsibility to provide the resources to the teachers to do that. And then in triangulating data between what we're hearing as we go through our business and then looking at OLEG audits and such, I do think that the evaluations of teachers and leaders is something that the legislature is going to be interested in, or at least that's what it seemed to sound like when that audit was presented. And I do think that it's time for that to be put back on the table. And then we have not done anything with the charter audit. And I think that's improper. I think we need to look at that. I really also, in a third category, request for information on licensing. It continues to be, it's just, I know we're working on it. I know we've got a lot of things in the works. What I'm looking for is what does our licensing folks, what do they identify as barriers in what they're trying to accomplish now that they're this far down the road because it's got to get fixed and it's got to be fixed right. And I know there's work in this space, but we certainly need more information because we need to continue to work on that challenge. So those are my notes. So I don't know where you want to take that, Chair. Good luck with that.
Let me try to just kind of isolate briefly. I think it might help if we come with some kind of list and then figure out which of those could be some form of an action item. So transportation was something that was on the agenda last year for $5 million. Would the request there be that we reformulate a business case addressing in that your point of things that districts would do to be innovative if they didn't have a transportation barrier? I'm trying to formulate kind of I know that we may have a long list and may not be able to do all of them, but is that kind of what we'd be looking for there?
Well, and looking for what transportation needs do they have, because it's the understood implicit underlying understanding that if they can't fully fund their transportation, then they're limited to what they can do for students just in general. That's one I don't know what the amount would be, but I do think that is a business case we could move forward, and all we'd have to do is reassess what our ask could be. So right. For the at-risk WPU, transportation, and I'm concerned about small district and charter school-based funding being only one time, but I don't always understand that stuff. So that's just something, but those were business cases that I think we should move forward and not drop.
Yeah.
And then
let me ask you on the at-risk funding, would that be then to ask for reconsideration of the legislative position last year? Okay, so some form of, because that money was allocated, it was part of what came out of the West Ed funding. So this would be something to reevaluate what that legislation and funding channel that.
Yeah, I just don't think we've solved the issue.
So some form, and are we in a position, I'm trying to sort of do this on the fly, but try to pin down each one of these so that we can move through each member's thoughts. And to Deputy Superintendent Jones, is that something where we have new information that we could do any form of assessment on, kind of what's been done so far and tee up an opportunity to reassess as we go into the fall?
Chair, while he's formulating that response, could I maybe could we hear from the other to see if any of them they agree with, and then we could see what we need to do? Because maybe I'm out left field on
sure. Yeah, I'm trying to get the world of each person's sort of concerns in a little bundle here. So that's one. The market adjustment is something I think that is a request to renew probably the business case and take a look at what we've lost since last time. Educator time, I know is going to be under consideration, but no movement on that yet. The charter audit, and I'm curious here whether you're suggesting a funding or more of a policy approach. Was there a funding item that might come out of the review of the charter audit?
I think it depends on the policy changes as to whether or not there needs to be funding attached to it to do it properly. There's lots of findings in there, lots of suggestions. I personally am interested in revisiting the role of charters and the autonomy that charters have. So I just think that's kind of an omnibus almost. It's policy, it's funding, it's philosophy. That's a biggie. And the same with licensing, but licensing is really a request for information, because you get along a path and then you find pitfalls, and I just don't want that one dropped at all.
Yeah, okay. So some of those could be a question of policy that might actually be in another committee, but might have a funding ramification. So something to consider. Okay, Kristen, did I get your list correctly, Member Hart? Vice
Thank
Chair
you.
Norton.
I am really in line with a lot of the things that Board Member Hart just discussed. I look at it as a city. I want my infrastructure there. Yep, swimming pools are sexy and cool. Urban development is awesome, but I want my plumbing to work. I want there to be water. And so a lot of my thoughts are along those lines. The WPU value increase, the at-risk WP add-on, transportation, the USBE market adjustment, the critical USBE FTEs, and the educator-directed time for preparation. So again, we need to fund our core needs, and then if we can, let's add on to our priorities. I do have some priorities, but so, just a lot of what Molly just said. I also have a question, and the answer might be from Deputy Superintendent Jones. Just hold on and wait until later in the meeting, because the other priority or question that I had is also tied with that capital, that Senate Bill 125 that she's going to be discussing. But I did have a question on our additional USB funding request, line item number 25, the one-time funds are for capital needs. And this question was, even lit more on fire from listening to that revolving LEA loan meeting, because it became apparent that is a valuable resource, and it's being used exactly the way it was intended. And we're getting the payments back. It sounded wonderful. But also it was brought up that there are very few districts at this point that can meet the 2-4 capital levy. And so they are going to be looking obviously heavily at this capital needs, and that might go really quickly. And so I don't know, is that something that we should discuss later in the meeting with Deputy Superintendent Stallings?
All right, thank you. Let me move through, and I think several of these probably have common questions we can come back to. Just turn to Chair Huntsman and Member Hutchings.
So, we have this opportunity of picking and choosing, and it's about our priorities. And then also we're picking our battles. We've got to be realistic in this. And so I think it's really good to see what the legislature had an appetite for and what our previous journey was all about and what came close and what didn't. I'm surprised on the list that as we're going through this, the reducing curricular and co-curricular fees isn't on a priority at all. And when we look at our the other association, USBA and the rest of them, it was a priority, and I'm pretty sure that's coming back. But I think is our intention to do our own personal list, or is it to do the big rocks first? What are the big rocks? And then as we get closer to August and September, fine tune the smaller ask, because I can see one of my concerns of this. We're going to put we'll put hours into the hand wringing in this. I'll call it hand wringing, and then when we get to our board, then you times that by 3, because they all have our rest of our board members have their individual priorities or business cases they want to move forward, and then we end up in that same space of do we or do we not take a survey and do that ranking. So I'm going to stay out of, I think I value you guys' time, and so I'm not going to waste it with what I think be in there, because I think you guys are going to throw a whole bunch of stuff on the table. The question is what's going to stick and when, and I leave that up to the chair to run the meeting. But hopefully in your list of things, that eliminating school fees is going to be part of it as I look at this. And it also messages, if we didn't get what we want if we didn't get what was our priorities last session, and why are they not coming back this session with more traction? How did our priorities change? And then why? Those will be all questions asked by educators of Education Appropriation Committee. They'll be asking that themselves. So Roger, I'll let you guys stay engaged.
Thank you, Chair. And I think, we're sort of covering the broad spectrum here, and then we can focus on some of those big rocks and priorities, I think is what hopefully comes out of this today. Member Hutchings, interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, great list. I appreciate Molly kicking it off because it mirrors a lot of the ones that I had identified. And I do think if you look at most of those that Molly had said we should revisit, they are in our priorities, most of them. And so I think that's a good thing. And that shows that there's been previous interest and our interest continues. One thing that hasn't come up that I hear about a lot of it's a pain point for schools. It sounds like there's a need that's being expressed by parents, and that's the optional full day kindergarten. And I know it's a bit of a political point, and we need to make sure it's an optional full day kindergarten. But when I go to meetings with school leaders, that is the topic that comes up in just about every meeting when you have elementary school leaders there, that parents are wanting it, they're wanting to provide it, they just don't know how to fund it. And when it wasn't fully funded, then the discussion became, how do we do this with it partially funded? And so I personally would want to add that to the list. The co-curricular, I agree, it's important. I'd be interested in the discussions around it, since there are some school fees that we already are having to make adjustments for. And there could be the argument that schools have had to adapt and figure it out for a year. And so why bring it back? I don't know. That's why that actually, I didn't put that on my list, because I'm not, a year later, I don't know if it's as strong of an argument as it was this last year, and they didn't fund it this last year when it was the strongest need, or at least reason for a need. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Oh, and I actually, the charter, these were not on my list at all. But I think I agree they are big pain points. The charter audit, we need to revisit. Absolutely. And licensing, that's probably the biggest pain point when I look at dealing with USB. So I'm really glad you brought those up.
All right, thank you, Member Hutchings. I see a hand from Deputy Superintendent Jones, and then back to Vice Chair Norton and Member Hart.
So, yeah, I appreciate you calling on me, sir, just to address multiple questions that come so far. So with the SB1 or with the 125 rule, right? And that earlier question about should we wait? I don't think you need to wait or anything. I mean, for example, if we just focus on the transportation piece, one thing you see here on this list is that you did ask for an additional 5 million. What you don't see, but because, or if you do say, hey, we recommend to the full board that we pursue transportation again, as part of the business case process, we bring back to you how much transportation actually did. So transportation funding actually did get increased last year. It was by way of the increase to the WPU. Also, what changed though is some legislation that said that we have to cap each individual LEA. So if you're saying, hey, we want to focus on transportation, what that does is that enables us as staff to prepare earlier, to provide you the information earlier for decision making. right? i.e. how much actually did get funded last year for transportation? What was the impact of the legislation that took place, with the change to the cap by LEA? We can bring that back to you in the June meeting or to the full board, so that they can start this process with you and all of you together. Because I do completely understand Chair Huntsman's, concerns and pieces to this. Also related to the curricular and co-curricular fees, a lot of that had to do with the fact that there was a lot of uncertainty on the calculation on how much exactly would be needed to eliminate those. So if the board is saying, and you're saying, hey, this could be, I know it's subject to your final direction and your prioritization, if you will, on that, but it allows us as staff to go back and prepare to brief you on, hey, this is why potentially it didn't pass or it didn't get funded or, along those lines. So that's why this starting this process this early will allow the time and effort to take place over a longer time period by the staff, so that ultimately we arrive at where you want and what you need information wise, and then amount wise to proceed and meet the law and do the legislative requests. So that I just wanted to make sure that's in there, because we acknowledge and understand Chair Huntsman's concerns as well. So hope that helps.
Thank you. Yes, very much. Let's see, Vice Chair Norton and then Member Hart.
Yes, I wanted to address Chair Huntsman's comments too, because I'm by no way saying that there are not priorities on my list that have nothing to do with infrastructure. But as a matter of fact, my number one priority on there is all-day kindergarten, and my number two on there was the co-curricular fees. But that brings up some questions. We know that with kindergarten, we have got to maybe rearrange the way that business case looks, because we're not ready in the first year, and we're not going to be ready for the full amount in the second year. And so my question is, do we need to change our request to meet our first year plan? Or what is our goal for first year and what's our goal for second year, so that by the third or fourth year we can be, ready to roll out throughout the state? What is it going to take? And so do we need to adjust our ask to meet just this first year plan? So that was, that's one of my questions that I was going to ask. My second question that I was going to ask had to on the co-curricular fees was twofold. One, I saw that they, did not even have, it did look to me like they had no appetite for that. I thought that was going to be a big, oh, look, we can cut taxes, and it obviously wasn't. Now, there were some questions, but my other question that has to do with that is, if our funding mechanism gets changed, and and that takes some of the tax burden off of the voters, that's wonderful, kind of. But I then don't feel like we need to then reduce that burden again with this. I feel like we would be paying our fair share into that, one way or the other. I think we need to find some kind of a resolution for what's going to happen with our funding stream before we can go down either one of these roads. I've got too many questions there to even put that on my list at this point. Although, I am a big believer in free and public education. I think that should be our number two priority.
What specifically should be the number two, Kristen?
What?
How would you frame that then, your number two priority? My
number two priority would be the reduction of fees. My number one would be all-day kindergarten.
Yeah, got it. Okay. And as I see this playing out, I think at the end of this, we have a couple of options. If there are things on which we feel strongly enough that we would like to request a business case be forwarded to the board in June, then I think we could vote on that. If there are other elements that we feel like we need specific concrete answers and further evaluation, then we can request that for June. I think couple of tracks there, it seems to me, given all the ideas that have been thrown out. So that's at least how I saw this kind of moving to action options after we sort through all this. But Member Hart and Chair Huntsman?
Yeah, so in essence, and I think this goes back to what Deputy Superintendent Jones was saying, in essence, these are all requests for information, right? We're wanting to take the first steps to see what the lay of the land is right now. In terms of curricular fees, the reason that that really should have been a request for info on my list, because my primary, I was not in favor of moving that forward because I don't believe that we had enough data to be fair or accurate in our estimates. And if we were way wrong, we would be putting districts and schools really at risk, or that would really become a pain point. I think we're getting additional information. I think that superintendents are more plugged into the fees in their own districts. I think we can get a lot of good information and actually come up with a more nuanced plan forward rather than just cut curricular fees, or, it can just be a little bit more precise and guarantee a win rather than kind of just throwing it in the rank as a rule. So that I agree. Now, as for the all-day K, I still, what was presented to us was, we don't want to leave, and I understand why legislators wouldn't want to leave unused money appropriated and just sitting there. So I was under the impression that there was money that's gradually coming, or that there was, while that isn't ever a guarantee, that was kind of more the plan. And that was partially because LEAs said, whoa, we're not, maybe we need a few years to get ready for that. So it wasn't that I don't think it's a business case that shouldn't go forward. It's that I'm unsure of where that actually is and if that would require a business case. But in every, and the reason, Chair Moss, I'm really reluctant to say, hey, let's move these forward, is because I'm really not too sure. And I don't know if our committee is ready to do that. I'm thinking we need a little bit more information, but we can always say, to Deputy Superintendent Jones' point, we can say, write this up or do the research for this, and then we can look at it again in June. I just would hate, with this big of a thing, I just wanted to get the ball rolling. I didn't want to say, hey, this is the list or whatever. Just wanted to start conversation. I don't know if we're ready to go where we're ready to take it, but just my thoughts.
Thank you. And like I said, I think when we've finished hashing through those, we'll see if anybody feels comfortable enough to put one or more of these up for specific action, or if they're all requests for further exploration before June. So appreciate everybody's input. Chair Huntsman.
So I want to remember what Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones said, was this is just a starting point. These are like draft. These are not the end game. This is the beginning part of it. And I guarantee you, when we get to the opportunity in our board meeting, that this is going to be moved around. I think the worst thing we can do is to rank them even. I think what we're doing is putting what we think is relevant on the table for discussion and prioritizing the business case side of it, of what's important, so we get staff moving forward on putting those business cases together. That's just how I see this moving forward. And I do want to say this about the a little bit on the optional full day of kindergarten, and also the reduced curricular and co-curricular fees. We got to remember who's feeding the beast here. It's public ed approach and executive approach. They only have so much money, and they wanted the show I mean, it's a big thing to load up that WPU, which creates opportunities for every LEA if they choose to not do the fee thing. So that's what happened in this space. That money jumped up to that, what was it, 60 million. I've got to really put my readers on and take a look at how that was. I mean, at one time they were talking 60. If I remember,
64, 60.
And it started off, 30, 45, and then we started getting what the LEAs report to us, what they're charging on those fees. And so we sum it up. So I'm going to disagree a little bit with Molly on all the indecision of what those fees are all about. But it does give an opportunity for that due diligence to happen. If the board chooses to make it a priority, then those LEAs can get into the game and make sure that they have their better numbers. So I just in this discussion item, I don't know if we just make a motion for the business cases to get started would be appropriate, but I think everything on that list that was started that was before us, including optional full day kindergarten and including the reducing the curricular and co-curricular fees, I believe is a good start. But I don't, if that list was back up, I would make a motion on that, and I'd like to see the business cases go before the full board.
So Chair, let me go ahead.
No, go ahead.
If I can respond, I think part of the opportunity here is to, again, sort of set the table and reset the table and see which elements did not get funding, why they didn't get funding, has anything changed? Do we need to put together a better business case? Do the board members still want to prioritize it? And we've got those up here, that the ones that were not funded. I'll just take a shot at a couple of questions of mine that might be considered. And some of this, I think other board members, frankly, could weigh in, or perhaps staff. I'm still very interested in the piece of teacher recruitment, retention, and reward. And I think one of the biggest pieces out there is the 64 million that was given to teachers. We also had bonus payments for extra assignments. So the legislature did a lot to put money in the schools through the WPU and then directly into the hands of teachers. We funded some things through ESSER that went to teachers. So I'm curious, perhaps a question for staff, is there anything out there in the year since we initially prioritized things and seeing what came out of the legislature that would be a suggestion towards that space of either teacher recruitment or reward? I know we have, for example, mentoring and teacher leader programs. So rather than throw something out that's a concrete business case that I would like to put on the list, I'm just curious to sort of use this to get the lay of the land. Anybody have a sense for whether that's an opportunity to revisit what we continue to see about, the challenges for teachers, both in, their stress levels, their needs and priorities? Deputy Jones.
Sir, so, I just want to clarify real quick with everyone. Any request we make or submit to the governor's office, in accordance with the law, has to have a business case. So I just want to make sure that we don't have to prioritize. That's not required. But to your question, sir, I'm not aware of any specific requests the board has made in the time I've been here for funding that relates specifically to teacher retention. Sarah can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't recall a particular, hey, we would use this funding specifically to increase retention in the state or do anything. I think what's happened is there's been requests that legislators have made along the lines of, additional planning days and and teacher bonuses as means to enhance or increase the likelihood of retention out there. But I'm not aware of any business case or proposal made by the board in the past that's been, hey, we want this funding for teacher retention. Everything's been pretty in the interest of recruiting, retention, but not specific to just that one, aspect, if that helps.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm aware of those two, the teacher days and the teacher bonuses. So my question is more just thinking and noodling around here as an opportunity to explore. Is there anything, and perhaps I could direct this to Chief of Staff Young, unless we may have lost her. I think she had to probably jump into a different meeting.
I'm right here.
Oh,
Sorry,
hi.
I'm just probably
Hi.
further down on the screen because I'm not talking.
Well, thank you. And we haven't turned to you. So again, this is just kind of an opportunity to noodle around a little bit. And I understand, of course, any request would need a business case, go through the board with a business case, and go up to PEA. But I'm just kind of thinking this is an opportunity to see whether we have thought of and worked through any ideas that are the most recent and up to date, what we've seen in the last year in terms of ESSER and teacher surveys and the legislative audit on retention. There's a lot going on in this space. And so my question is more, is there anything we should consider as a possible business case directed to this idea of keeping teachers, rewarding them beyond what's already out there? I'm aware of what's out there. So it's just kind of brainstorming stage.
Chair, if I may respond.
Please.
So one of the potential approaches, so instead of approaching you with ideas, I'm going to approach you with a potential process. So one thought would be that if you have an interest in seeing, from your experts and staff related to teacher mentoring, retention, and leadership, you could charge staff with kind of reviewing the landscape and coming back to you with potential proposals. So that would then give staff an opportunity to be able to work with our LEAs, take a look at the current kind of landscape, and then bring you back options that could be considered to be able to address those topic areas.
Thank you. That might be a request. And like I say, I think what we can do at the end of this is just kind of take through some of these areas and see what folks want to move for request of further development, request for a business case. My other question is, and again, I appreciate all those that have been brought up, so I'm not going to repeat. In the area of parent engagement, and I was reviewing the strategic plan, and we've got, sections, the 2A section, I won't refer to it, but, sort of looking through the plan, that kind of goes to this teacher leader development, retention, mentoring. That's a very broad spectrum I just rattled off. But again, I'm just curious to make sure we've done our latest and greatest thinking on what budgetary priorities we might consider, whether we want to include them or whether we want to leave that in the WPU, of course, is a big question. But just something I thought it might be worth looking at. The second is parent engagement. That covers sort of the 1D part of the plan. We have some good ESSER funding that we promoted for home visits that I've been a fan of. That's of course ESSER money that's floating around out there. But I was curious, and again, I'm sorry I'm spitballing, but I think this is part of the opportunity we have, is to just think broadly about what are our goals in education, and then do we have funding mechanisms, whether that's the WPU or something else. And so on the point of parent engagement, we have a staff member, Jessica Callan, who does a great job of outreach to parents. It's limited currently to the Title III or Title I space, as that's where the funding is. There's a lot of discussion about parental engagement out there. As we talked about, internal personnel needs. Would it be wise to think about whether we have allocated the right focus or funding to broad-based parental engagement, in not necessarily directly, but for guidance of LEAs in this type of space? That might be another one to look at. Is that something that that Sarah, you have any immediate input on, or something maybe just to think about as it relates to perhaps an FTE or, and again, board members, I'm not throwing out concrete proposals. I'm trying to think broadly and spitball, but Chief of Staff Young, is there any thought on that in terms of our internal personnel and funding?
Yeah, so another really great idea. I will concur that currently Jessica's role is limited to the title dollars by which her position is funded. And so if the board was interested in expanding that role to be able to provide services and supports for schools beyond that specific kind of federal designation, we would definitely need to look at what FTE could, maybe compensate that existing federal piece. So it may not be a full one, but again, a proposal that we could bring back and say, here are some of the elements of the work that's happening. Here is who that work currently serves. If you wanted to expand that work to additional school populations, here would be some cost estimates for what that would look like.
Thank you. Okay. Those I think are perhaps the ones that I had that were unique. I think the SOEP discussion brought up a question of whether we need to expand the funding there. We're clearly tight on funding, and we're having to make choices on who gets priority. So my sense would be it's a good time to revisit that, given the demand from parents and students out there. I think the charter based funding or administrative funding, it sounds like we'll have some answers in June from the audit. And so hopefully that goes into that question. We had $8 million allocated one time for admin funding, and that's been kind of ad hoc for a couple of years during COVID. Greatly appreciated the legislature keeping that funding going. But it is one time, and I think that audit will help inform that discussion. So, those are sort of the thoughts that I had that were not already mentioned. Member Hart had a hand up, and I think, we've got an hour left. My feeling here is that we might come from this, having surveyed the landscape, to members who want to make a motion to prepare a business case for consideration, or those that perhaps are not quite to the stage of a business case, but request for more information, like perhaps those that I've just discussed with Chief of Staff Young. So I hope we do take this opportunity to sort of pinpoint those things that we want to take another crack at, and maybe things we want to explore. And I don't think we'll take too long to do that. Given the number, there's a lot of overlap in here. So Member Hart, do you have another question or comment? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question and then a motion. I was wondering if I could address this question to Chief of Staff Young. I really like what I just heard as an idea, where I think what I heard is staff would come up with some feedback, a list of their own, some ideas that have come out of the field that they're thinking about, so that we could hear that input as well. Was that kind of what you were sort of saying?
Chair, if I may.
Sure, please.
Thank you. So Board Member Hart, yes, I guess I would clarify, we really do look to your direction in terms of what specific areas you would like us to investigate and bring back. We have found, I'm sure Deputy Jones can speak to this, when we do just kind of an open call, you end up with, anywhere between, 30 to 70 business cases, just because we have very passionate staff who have a lot of great ideas about, additional things we could do to support our schools and our teachers. Sure. So we really do look to your direction in terms of, like I said, I'll use Chair Moss's example in terms of he's interested in solutions related to teacher leader programs, mentorship programs, and teacher retention, bringing back options there. That's very helpful because it really does kind of put the guardrails in place so that we are addressing the needs you've requested.
Okay, can whoever was typing that list, can I see that list? Is it possible?
List of.
There it is. I guess I have a second question, Chief of Staff Young. How reasonable would it be to request additional information on these items in our next board meeting?
Chair, if I may.
Please.
Certainly, we will be able to pull most likely information related to a couple of things. Number one, the current funding levels. We have those at our agency. We'll also be able to respond with any kind of existing infrastructure that we have at the agency. The one that gets a little tough for us between now and next board meeting would be doing more of a larger scale kind of survey of our LEAs. So as long as you're okay with that initial information really being driven by some of our agency logistics, I would say, I think that because Deputy Jones has initiated this so early, as you start to get information about that infrastructure, you would have additional time to be able to share that with LEAs and receive input.
Could I, oh, sorry, go ahead, Member Hart.
Well, I just saw Scott, Deputy Jones' hand, and before I make I want to make a reasonable motion. So I'm trying to formulate that in my head. So I'm trying to get a sense for what would be reasonable to request for the next board meeting.
Well, let me turn then to Director or Deputy Jones, and perhaps if I could suggest for that list, whether that's going to be an omnibus motion or separate, but the internal FTEs, including parental engagement, might be one that I'd be interested in learning more about. So Deputy Superintendent Jones, did you have a?
Yeah, just real quick, and I think it's worth my doing this, is I can't emphasize enough how important it is that we're very clear on whether or not board members want, business cases to come from any other source. Because in the past, what we've done is we've had the JLC priorities put in front of you, because we look at the Joint Legislative Committee as the representation of the field on the district side, right? And, I understand that part of it too, but we also do discuss, priorities with charter school representation and things like that as well. Back to Chief Staff Young's point, if we open this up and say, hey, everybody just come in, so we've really been trying to just do it. And the other piece to this too is at some point it would help staff be very clear if the board's intent is to not have us work on anything but what you ask us to work on and prioritize, or anything but that, you want us to work on, to formulate what you present in addition to what the JLC priorities are, or things like that. That would help us clear a lot too, because otherwise, which has happened in the past, you're going to get, additional business cases that are brought up internally as ideas from staff. If you want to still do that, that's great. We want to foster that environment. That's fine too. But that clarity is something too. And that's why we're starting this early, is to ensure that, again, given the feedback we got, that it's board driven on what you want to see come before you. And if you want to open it up to, hey, we'd also like to see additional ideas beyond these, or what else the board asks us as staff to provide them, right? That's fine too. Lastly, I just want to make sure too that we will do our level best to ensure that you're all informed on what we call, or what I call, parallel processes. So right now we have the economies of scale continuation from the West Ed funding study that's going on, that whatever those findings are, or whatever is conveyed from that and presented over the interim and into the session would likely have an effect on the at-risk WP add-on. As an example, I'm just saying that. So there's other parallel processes that are going on too, that as we move together and as the staff supports you in your direction towards the next legislative session and meeting the law for the submission to the governor's office, we will advise and keep you appraised of these parallel type processes that are going on as well. Well, I said lastly, so lastly, at some point too, we really do need to, hone in on the WPU, right? On, we do it. And typically that's done with the full board, and so that's fine too, but that's an integral piece to all this process as well. So, but Gus, we're starting really early. So thank you, sir.
Yeah, no, thank you. And before I turn back, I guess just in terms of process, that has been my understanding of this opportunity, is that if somebody felt strongly enough about a particular item to move a business case be forwarded to the board in June, we could do that. If what we're feeling rather is that we'd like business cases worked up for the potential reconsideration and forwarding in June with some backup done, that would be what I see as probably the most likely output. I'm not trying to foreclose or suggest motions, but I think that's a great opportunity, is that we request, information in a potential business case, we review it and send it along. I'm interested in hearing other board members. We're kind of making this process up as we go. That's what I see as the most streamlined and efficient way to take advantage of this opportunity. And that we all understand, I guess, on the WPU, we're way out from any kind of numbers that are going to guide that. We obviously want to be aggressive in advocating, and we understand the budget realities that go into that. So that's kind of the number one that's always hanging out there, right? And it's probably a bit early for us, I would think, to be advocating for a particular percentage increase. We got growth, got stabilization fund, we got WPU, we got a lot of pieces there going on that depend on a lot of things. So at least as I saw this opportunity, we have a list here, and I think somebody might be making a motion for some or all of these to go into consideration that could produce a business case for potential movement on, or it might be a request for information. I don't see it as our obligation at this stage to put in things that we might hear from JLC to answer that question. We understand that's going to come into the process. And so, I think my understanding here was that we would focus on what this committee saw as the priorities, understanding that others have their priorities, that we want to be engaged in that discussion. The full board's going to be engaged in that discussion. Some of these things I think are responsive to requests from the field, but obviously others are going to weigh in. So I guess one question might be, at what point do those come into this process, and do they come into the finance committee? If there are other suggestions or proposals from the JLC or from our staff, would it be smart to request that we hear about some of those in June for consideration and possible action to recommend? Or do we wait on that until the board? Any structural thoughts, Chair Huntsman? You don't have your hand up, but obviously looking to you for guidance as we do this in a way that allows us to take a good first crack at it, but doesn't foreclose all the input that needs to come in.
Again, this is a starting place to get prepared and move our best case forward. The JLC isn't going to give us anything until right there when we traditionally, it's right there when we are on timing wise, it's when we have to submit to the governor. So you're not going to get input from that. It's just a lot of this is what's happened in our previous experience. But I guess unless something changes between now and September, I could see the vast majority of the board agreeing with every item that's on here without any questions. I see this as a good starting point to get moving, to start putting those business cases or start on those business cases and then take it to the board. I see it's a great starting. It's not the end game again. We just need to start the ball rolling. And I would also recommend that the way that these are not in any priority order. These are just our priority.
Right.
So I think it's a great start. I'm excited about it. It's better than what we have done in the past, and we're always constantly trying to do things a little bit better, but that's where I think we're at.
Okay, I think Member Hart had a motion potentially, but I see Vice Chair Norton and Deputy Superintendent Jones. Did you want to speak up before we turn to Vice Chair Norton? Okay, Vice Chair Norton, and then back to Member Hart may have a motion for us.
Okay, I would just like to maybe suggest that instead of listing this as at-risk WP add-on, we just list it as WP and it becomes, sorry, WPU, and it becomes all-inclusive. It includes at-risk and it includes the value increase.
And so would that be kind of an examination of what happened last time, what the purpose of at-risk is, and how it might play out in respect to what we ultimately advocate for the full WPU? Because I don't think we're in a stage yet to be throwing numbers for WPU, right? This is kind of more
Right. But yeah, just that we need to address all parts of the WPU.
Got it.
Safe, very good.
And would this also include, as this business case, some of the background? You know, I'm trying to learn from last year. So would this also include some of the research that needs to be done? I mean, is there any research on all-day K that shows that there is, you know, learning advantage after third grade? You know, apparently we couldn't find that last year. So is that something that we could find, you know, going forward? So that's the, you know, what, and it could be anything on this list. What did we learn from last time that we need research for our business case?
So my request, and before we turn to Member Hart, when I appreciate Chief of Staff Young's response, you know, the things that questions I threw out about parental engagement and boosting for teachers in terms of, you know, leader programs, retention. Hopefully the request there is that we come back with what we know about that area, and that would include all-day K. You know, the all-day K questions came up. We had one that was kind of a readiness question from districts that said, you know, perhaps we're not ready to do this, even if it's funded, if it's mandated right now, at least as I understand. I could be speaking incorrectly there, but to the broader point, also questions about, you know, what the research shows. So I think this is that opportunity on any of these, you know, what do we know about the benefit of these possibilities? And as it relates, for example, to, you know, teacher retention or engagement as teacher leaders or whatever, you know, what's the latest and greatest that we're going on, and so that we can discuss that as a board. So that's a great point. And I think that's the advantage of starting this early, is we get to do that up front and then discuss it with the board. Deputy Jones, your hand's still up. Were you? Something
yes,
further?
just real quick to Chair, to Board Member or Vice Chair Norton's point, what that will do too is allow us to analyze and provide how much, you know, increases to the WPU would cost, you know, in relation to, you know, X percentage and how it affects these different add-on programs. So yep, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, perfect.
So clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Member Hart, back to you.
Yes, okay, so bear with me, apologize in advance. I'd like to move that staff prepare for June business case drafts on transportation, the WPU, including, oh wait, I think based on what you just said, we'd move that one down to information. It's too early. So transportation, USBE market rate adjustments, small district and charter school-based funding, and full day kindergarten, and prepare information about reducing curricular and co-curricular fees, educator time for, are you writing this down somewhere?
I'm not. I think we have somebody's.
We are.
Yeah. Is Sarah?
That's on a screen.
Okay, good. Okay, I'll keep going. Evaluations for teachers and leaders, charter audit implications and findings, educator licensing, teacher leader and mentorship programs and retention, parent engagement, internal FTE needs for USBE capacity and service, and SEOP, hold on. All subject to the board's direction and open for modification. Open to modifications.
So do I understand that to be a two-part motion? And
Well,
some-
it's business cases at the top, because I think we can get more information and move quicker on some of those. And then the ones down below, I don't think are ready for business cases, because we're not exactly sure where we want to go with that.
Right.
And those would be informational.
Good, okay. Do we have those correctly then? There were 3 that were included for concrete business case ready for June presentation to the board, and the others would be for our review and committee in June for then forwarding to the board. Is that?
No,
fair?
well,
No?
Chair, hang on a sec, just for clarity, she,
Clarify.
as part of her motion, she wanted a business case for teacher prep days. I'm probably got the wrong. Is that right, ma'am? Teacher
yeah,
prep
it's
days? Yep.
transportation, USBE market rate adjustments, small district and charter school-based funding, and all-day K.
Okay, hang on. Let's pause, please. Okay, so she also wanted teacher prep days, or say that again, ma'am, teacher.
What do we,
Preparation,
Planning.
Sure.
and-
educator directed preparation time.
yes. And then requests for information on
Licensing,
fees,
okay, hang on, ma'am. Hang on, ma'am.
Oh.
Please.
Yeah.
Fees,
licensing,
SOEP,
SOEP, evaluations for teachers and leaders.
got it.
So educator time is being put up.
Oh,
top.
yeah, educator time can
Pull
go to
that
the top
one.
because we already have
Yeah. that
we
was
already have
up
plenty of
there.
information on that.
All right, so just delete that.
Yeah.
Right.
Delete educator time.
Charter audit. Parent engagement. Yep. Internal FTE needs for USBE capacity and service. And I think that's all. Let me count.
Can't we put WPU up at the top?
Yeah, we did. I did. Oh, wait,
Oh.
no. Well, we can. I'm certainly open to that amendment. I mean,
We've done it for hundreds of years, so we have a pretty good idea of what the business case is going to start. We're just going to need the numbers.
Yeah, I would
That-
recommend you making that a business case, because by way of that analysis or information will come out in the business case. I feel strong
Perfect.
about that. Yeah, and I'm committing Dale Frost to doing that right now, so. Get ready, Dale, so.
do we have 9? Yes. And then the end of I want to make it real clear that this is just for board consideration, which I guess is implied, but subject to the board's direction and open for modification.
So Member Hart, this would be for presentation to the full board in June, not necessarily for action by the board or potentially for action by the board.
Potentially for
Yeah.
action, we don't want to artificially stop the process that doesn't need to be.
Sure,
Right.
I'm just clarifying the difference between part 1 and part 2. Part 1 will have a business case for recommendation of adoption by the board, correct?
If there's enough information and the board feels comfortable with it, yes.
Sure.
The first one, there's an expectation that more information is available and we are farther along in the process. The second one is, I don't think it's reasonable, just personally, I don't think it's reasonable to create a business case this early with the information that we have.
And so my procedural question there is, would the action item that we recommend the board take on that bottom section, you're saying that's to the board rather than back to committee for formulation of a business case for August? You'd like to move that to the board.
Because then the board can then decide if it needs to go back to committee or if they're going to instruct staff to create a business case.
Got it. Okay, that's what I'm just making sure we got procedural clarification on the difference between those two.
Chair, may I ask
Yeah.
for additional clarity from a staff perspective?
Please.
So if I understand correctly, staff will form or work on business cases that will go into the backups to this agenda item that will be seen by the full board. And the information will be in the backups as well, because this request for information that you guys are doing is spot on. I mean, you guys are asking for information that I know other board members would want to know too, with the intent that the board in the June meeting further this process by saying, okay, or potentially saying, okay, not only do we want to continue with these business cases, but we also want these business cases, whatever those are, for the August meeting, the R5. Do you see how we're trying to incrementally move towards? Yep. Right. So, because then what you're doing as a finance committee, if I may say so, is you're facilitating and supporting board direction on where we end up with our requests for submission to the governor's office by law and then too. So from a staff perspective, this really helps us, and we're not waiting until July or August to start the process of working on business cases. So thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Jones. And if I could just suggest one friendly amendment to the list, the parental engagement issue could be read pretty broadly. I intended that just to be a consideration of potential FTE needs within our office.
Yes.
Otherwise, that could be a pretty broad request. I did not mean to say, how can we spend some money on parental engagement in the universe?
No.
So let's tighten that one if that's a friendly.
Extending.
You can just pull up including parental engagement, frankly. That's what I intended, if that's.
Also, Board Member Hart, there is a recommended action that has been prepared. I don't know. Have you looked at that?
No.
That might be a little easier.
Thank you.
It kind of says what it is. It's just not as specific.
I should have looked.
Well, Chair, this is Scott, if I may.
Please.
If you just want to make the motion or the recommended motion for that, but I will say that we sincerely and so appreciate the specificity, though, with these. So there's the specific task of the recommended motion itself, but these implications of the business case of thing is spot on. Staff will run with it, to be prepared for the June board meeting.
So should I
respond? Well, go ahead, Member Hart. Then I'd like.
Should I just put that list then, or say as
that my recommendation
inserted?
Yeah, my recommendation for the record, so we have a clear record, is it probably makes sense to use the motion as previously prepared and add, I think, to your point, including the following with some specificity as to the difference between the two lists, right? So that we know what actually came out of, because there was a possibility we just send something back to committee. I support the motion as phrased, that you got a couple things that are concrete, ready for prime time. We tee up the business case. The others, we do go to the board to keep it moving rather than coming back to committee, but it's kind of a presentation of information for concrete consideration action by the board, right? At least if I'm understanding, right? So that seems to me to leave a clear record of what we're hopefully recommending here. Member,
Chair,
sorry, I see a couple.
Sorry, sir. Chair, if I may, just from a procedural point on the motion.
Yeah.
If somebody can move that list off so I can read the recommended action, please, just close the list. What I would ask you to do, sir, what I'd ask from a staff perspective, so that we're all very clear on the intent and the direction we're going, is to amend it to say that the Finance Committee recommends to the Utah State Board of Education funding and information requests for Utah State Board of Education staff to prepare and present to the full board beginning at the June 2022 board meeting to meet the requirements of the Budgetary Procedures Act for public education and ensure a budget proposal for the 2024 Utah Legislative General Session. See, when we did this recommended motion, we weren't sure the timing, right? We weren't sure if you want things to come back just to Finance Committee in June but given the flow of today's discussion, I recommend that the action be amended to say
Right.
Utah State Board of Education funding and information requests
Right.
for you to prepare and present beginning in June. Right.
Yeah, and then we would itemize the list so we're clear on which are for funding and which are.
Yes, sir. Yeah, thank you, sir.
So I see hands from Vice Chair Norton and Chair Huntsman, and then we should probably get to.
Sorry, mine, I just left mine up.
Oh, sorry, Chair Huntsman? May have left his up too. Chair Huntsman, are you?
Is the motion on the table?
Not quite. I think we're on the verge.
I have taken my motion off the table and I've come up with a new motion.
Okay, because in this, I don't see any reason why the curricular fee business case can't come forward. And I also know that, well, there's a money amount that's subject to change through our whole process by the time we get to our submission to the governor. And so a lot of that background's already been completed. And then the other part of this is just so that everyone's for their situational awareness, our business case, the information that's in each one is subject to change too.
Right.
Through this whole process. So this is still like draft. That's just put something way up on the board and we don't have to go through it. So if it's okay to the motion maker, I really think that should be in there. I'm perfectly, Chair, would you like me to make the motion to move this?
Please, I think
Okay.
we're ready with that adjustment. If you're amenable, that would take the top. And in our inbox, we have a nice email from Chief of Staff Young, unless you have it elsewhere. And it would just require pulling that first one at the bottom section and sticking it in the top section.
So
Maybe you already have it in front of you.
I move that the Finance Committee members, I move that we recommend to the Utah State Board of Education funding requests for
Funding and information, I think, right? I'm sorry.
funding
Do we
and
have this written up
information
with the
requests
changes?
for
Can I just-
Utah State Board of Education staff to prepare and present to the full board beginning at the June 2022 board meeting to meet the requirements of the Budgetary Procedures Act for public education and ensure a budget proposal for the 2024 Utah Legislative General Session regarding the following topics. Can someone put them up? Business cases for the WPU, including at-risk add-on, transportation, USB market adjustments, optional full-day kindergarten, small district and charter school-based funding, educator-directed planning, school fees, and information regarding licensing, SOEP, evaluations of teachers and leaders, charter audit, findings and implications, internal USB FTE needs for capacity and service, including parental engagement, all subject to board direction and open to modification.
Can I suggest one amendment before we vote?
Mhm.
Is that in order? So I think the evaluation of teachers and leaders was my suggestion, unless that came from somebody else.
Me
This
too.
appears to focus on evaluation, where my suggestion was support and retention of teachers, including teacher leader programs. Is that possible to, is that fit your intent?
We can, my intent, the reason I brought it up originally is to incorporate some of the OLAG findings that just came out as part of their audit.
So is
And
the
that was-
purpose of that, oh, sorry.
And that was specifically to evaluation, but I certainly don't mind broadening it to also include support and retention.
I apologize. I wasn't sure if that was teacher evaluation or evaluation of teachers and support, evaluation of support programs. So you did intend to include teacher evaluation.
Teacher evaluation
So I think
and
we have them both
leader
now. That's a
evaluation.
friendly amendment. We've got both in there.
I like both.
Okay. Chair Huntsman?
Oh, sorry, I'm bringing my hand down.
Okay. I think we've got a motion framed for voting unless there are any other points of order or clarification.
Clarification, budget proposal for the 2023 Utah Legislative General Session.
Oh, is that not in there? We should.
It's 2024.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
2023 session. Okay. Okay, with that correction, members, please vote. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Well, that is a classic example of how the sausage is made. And I think we have a great initial output there. So it's a little bit messy, but I appreciate members and staff for guiding us through that with a lot of good ideas and a concrete beginning step to move this process forward. So thank you for all working together to get that going. Let's get on to, we've got half an hour. I know we've got a few more agenda items. Let's turn to, I'll look to perhaps Deputy Superintendent Jones on direction. Yeah, do we have priorities here to address?
So we do have one more action item, but it's contingent on Angie's availability. I'm not sure if she can come over yet, but we probably need to get to it. So Cammie, will you text Angie and see if she can come over? But then, Chair, I would recommend that we go ahead and just do an information item, but we need to really make sure that we get to action item 7.
Right.
125, as soon as possible. So
okay. So we can move on our USIMS monthly report if that's what you see as the next priority.
Yeah, yes, sir. For item number 5, I just want to take the opportunity to recognize a couple people. So Cam, if you could open that up so we can do that just real quick while we see if Angie's coming over. Okay, for the first one, it's this recognition of the CEF scholarship application. And I'm not sure, is Laura here with us? I think she is, right?
I am here. Yes.
Yeah. So Laura works on our team. She's part of financial operations, and we want to recognize her for her receipt of this scholarship to attend this training. I may not know all of the details of it, but anytime we have staff members that get opportunities for professional development in the financial realm, and then are also awarded scholarships for their efforts and recognition for that, we want to recognize them. So Laura, thank you for being part of the team, and we wanted to recognize you for this receipt of this scholarship.
Thank you, Deputy Superintendent Jones and Laura. Would you mind just taking just a quick minute to tell us how you got the scholarship and how you're going to use this for your own professional development?
Absolutely. This is a group out of Georgetown that we follow their webinars quite frequently. They do quite a bit of measuring success against the intent of what we do in education. And I'm fascinated by the group. My manager, Brett Baltazar, actually had been through this training previously, and he did say it was interesting. I learned a lot. So I reached out to them last fall. We weren't able to get together last fall because of COVID. So this spring they said we are doing it, and I applied. They asked me my interest, and I was very shocked and pleased to go, and so grateful to the board for allowing me to go and sending me. It was very interesting. It was eye-opening to me to see the way that different states discuss the issues that we're talking about today. Made me really glad that I'm from Utah, and it helped me to understand how we can possibly gather data better in our department to help at the state level and even at the LEA level, how to help them make better decisions with their funding, with their budgets, and how to measure our successes with our intents. It was fascinating.
Well, thank you. And I guess if I'm reading this right, you just completed this. It's been done.
Well, I actually,
Or-
I've been in Saratoga Springs for the last couple of days. I'm now in Charlotte.
Oh,
But I have 7 more sessions actually to attend virtually to complete
gotcha.
it.
Well, congratulations. Thank you. And we would love to hear your thoughts from that process on the process we're currently going through. You heard us talk about, you know,
Yes.
how are we evaluating the effectiveness of the various funding options? So we'd love to hear from you. I think Member Hart has a hand up. Or no? Okay.
Congratulations.
There you go. Well, thank you. Congratulations. And yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts on our priority process in light of what you're learning about measuring effectiveness. So thank you much.
Thank you.
All right, Deputy Superintendent Jones.
Yeah, and then if Cammie will turn her camera on. Cammie recently walked the walk. She received her master's degree. And so Cammie, will you tell the group about that, you know, your experience at Weber State or with Weber State, what your degree's in, and we want to recognize you.
How nice. Is that why it's not in the backup?
Yeah, surprise.
Thanks. No, I just, the last year and a half, I've been at Weber State University doing their Master of Professional Communication program and just graduated last Friday. So it was fun.
Awesome.
Yay.
That is awesome. And we'd love to hear from you at some point too. I'm sure that's, you know, several of us have been through that grind of doing a degree on the side while you're working. And the downside is it kills you. The upside is it immediately informs what you're doing. And so look forward to hearing, you know, what you've gleaned from that. Congrats. That's a tough slog.
Thank you.
Okay, and I think that is Cammie was at all the recognitions, including the surprise on you for if that's it, then we can move to the PMR. Okay, so today, sir, Chair Moss, we're not drilling down on the PMR. The PMR is in the backups. We do that once a quarter.
Right.
So I just go to you, defer to you for any questions or concerns or from you or from any member of the committee on the progress on the USIMS project.
Any questions, members? And I'm mindful that we do have another action item, and we always have questions. I guess if Angie's not quite here yet, it might be nice just for a very 30,000-foot view of existing challenges and the, you know, again, I know it's tough to say 30,000-foot view on something as detailed as USIMS, but anything we ought to be aware of, especially as we kind of move into this integration of USIMS with the reporting and legal assurances questions.
Okay, no questions, sir?
No questions. I was just
Okay.
wondering if there's any 30,000-foot view of any obstacles that we need to be aware of and provide support.
Oh, yeah. So Director Felt, are you on?
I am. I would defer to Katrina Brinkley if that's okay.
Yeah, please, if Katrina's on.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Almost
Good
good
morning.
afternoon. Right now, our major focus is on hiring and getting those developers in. We are still seeing some of the turnover and churn that we've talked about a few times. We lost our product owner for the finance team here recently. We're working on hiring more. We're also expanding some of our hiring into some data engineers so that we'll be able to start getting that reporting and funding and financial stuff that you mentioned. So we're expanding there and hiring developers as fast as we can find them. And that's our real challenge right now, is just getting the people in who can do the work.
Thank you. And it's very important work, as we all know. And so I I expect you'll be asked for all the input when we're looking at this return on FTE funding, that we make sure we've got the folks we need and we can hang on to them. And we just have to have some way of stopping our beloved higher ed institutions from picking off more of our folks and everybody else in Silicon Slopes. We've got some valuable people, so appreciate all those efforts to keep this project running. And yeah, please let us know what we can do to advocate for the funding support we need. All right, well, thank you. If there's nothing further on that one, I think appreciate the update. Deputy Jones, I'll turn to you on sequence.
So, sir, if we, I know we're waiting for Angie. So if we could look at item number 6, the request for data and information.
You bet.
As a perpetual follow-up, Crow is the firm that APA selected for 2 years for their mentoring, as part of the outcomes that related to the audit, the internal audit. So that report is in there for your review. We were asked to provide it. They do it quarterly. They provide a quarterly report. So this is for January through March of 2022. So we encourage you to take a look at that and ask us any questions you might have. The next item for follow-up, if we could go to that, Cami, was let's see, which one's this one? What's the title of this one?
So this one is actually the last one. We did cover the charter school revolving.
Oh, we
loan.
did. Okay, right.
So
okay.
this is that line item one.
Okay, so this one, my understanding was you wanted brought back to you for us to address impacts to coming out of the legislative session. For example, public education capital and technology, that $91,500,000, we created a USBE rule. That was in Bill HB 475. So you can see where we've taken actions. You and the public can see where, based on the bill and then the subsequent USBE rule, that's where we're at, or the status of where we're at with rule creation.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Just on that one, would you mind just sort of distinguishing those amounts and what the restrictions are or guidelines on those two different items? You got the small district capital needs. We got 91 million on capital and technology. How broad is that first item?
Sam, go ahead. Or actually, Chair, I'm sorry, Chair, could you recognize Director Uri to answer that?
Yes, please. Thank you, Director Uri.
Thanks.
Yes, Sam Uri, School Finance Director. So we're actually addressing those first two today with R277125. It's very simple on the 91.5 million. The rule just clarifies the expendability period, that it needs to be expended by the end of 2025. The 50 million with the panel and the evaluation is a little bit more involved. The third item there, 64 million with HB 496. HB 396 is still being drafted. We've had some LEAs with some questions, and so we want to provide guidance on those as well. The board already amended R277489 for full day kindergarten, and just this week, Christine Elegante and Sarah Whipke, myself and Deputy Superintendent Jones met and finalized those allocations based on that rule. The LEAs have been notified this week and are making plans to go forward with that 12.2 million that was funded for full day kindergarten. And then the board also passed, I believe it's R277124 related to the $10 million for teacher bonuses for extra assignments. So those are the rules associated with new funding.
Thank you. And I guess while we're waiting, this will come out as we consider the rule in just a little bit here. Is there any overlap? Is my one question on items 1 and 2? and I apologize if I think the 50 million was pretty clear in our next action item, but I'm just
Right.
curious about overlap and scope of those two.
So they were appropriated in the same bill, and rather than write one rule or one complete rule just addressing the expendability of the 91.5 million, it's just tacked there on the end of our 277125 that we'll be considering today. So it's just that very last paragraph of the rule.
Yeah, okay. Well, we can come to that, I guess. My question, I mean, small districts, their guidelines around what that can be used for. I would assume small districts also have access to line item number 1 for $91 million.
Right. That one applies to all LEAs. So it was distributed, 20% of it was distributed to charter schools based on their enrollment. Then the other 80% was distributed to districts with a bigger base amount for smaller districts. So,
and that's where the 50 million comes in, or is that part of the 90
well, the 50 million is a separate
small
school district capital needs fund that can make loans and grants based on several different qualifying factors that we can kind of look at as we approach the rule. But the 50 million is kind of an ongoing fund for capital needs specific to small district LEAs only.
Right.
The 91.5 million is a more general distribution to all LEAs, including charters.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Chair?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I believe Angie's with us now.
Okay.
And but just as, procedurally, there's still 2 more information items left. We'll just probably need to move those to the June meeting to allow, enough time for this action item on 125. So there's information item number 8, or no, I'm sorry, information item number 9, which Aaron was here to do, and information item number 10. Item number 9 is really important in the sense of the time that's necessary for us to present to you on that information. So,
yeah, I appreciate that, and I think we can defer to you on putting those others over to June, unless any board members have a concern or objection to that. So let's go ahead then with item number 7.
Great. Would you like me, Chair Moss, to go ahead and start discussing the rule?
Floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning, committee members. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. Cami, thank you for, if you could actually pull up the rule draft itself. It's, yes, right there. And I think I came in, and I believe Sam has already probably given you a summary or an update about the why behind this rule. Essentially, as part of the 50 million, there's for small school district capital projects, there is a requirement in the statute for the rule, or I'm sorry, for the board to do a couple of things, including, and if you'll scroll down to, let's start at the definitions first. All 3 of the definitions that we defined in this rule are actually already defined in code. So we just pointed to where you can find those definitions in code. And then if you go down to section 3, you can, the first thing that the statute required is that the board create an application. And so you'll see here that this rule would direct the superintendent to create an application and shows some of the items that are required to be included. All of those items in lines 34 through 39 are things that the LEAs would be providing as part of their application, and that would be used by the panel for their review and recommendation. The next part is I put 2 options in here to see which way you wanted to go, because the statute stated that the board should determine how the panel's recommendations would be reviewed and approved. And it said, if applicable by the board, which I took to mean that the legislature was leaving it up to you, which you really have in all cases. Anything that is directed to you as the board, you can delegate that to the superintendent if you want. So you really have two options here. Once the panel makes their recommendations on projects, you could either have those, that you can see option one would have those recommendations come to the board. The board would review those in a board meeting, and likely would occur in January, but depending on the time could maybe be as late as February. Or option two, the board could delegate the approval to the superintendent, which essentially would be staff. And staff will be also participating on the panel along with others from DCFM, I believe the treasurer's office, and there's some governor's appointees, appointments that will also be on that. So if you wanted to talk more about option one or option two, I just ask that when we make the motion, or maybe we make a motion to say, please, we could do a draft two, would be either, I would finalize it with either option one or option two. And then the other things that if you keep going down, you'll see that we've given deadlines for when the applications need to be submitted. So an eligible school district should be submitting their proposal to the superintendent by November 1. And then by December 15th, there's an expectation that the panel has reviewed all of those proposals and will make recommendations to the board and or the superintendent. And then depending on the two approaches, either the superintendent would either bring those to the board, or the superintendent would likely take the recommendations of the panel and use those, go along, essentially do what the panel requested. Then the last paragraph that you'll see there, section 5, I heard Sam discussing that in general for the funds that are not expended under 53F 7202, that if they are not expended by June 30th, 2025, that those should be returned to the board or the superintendent by October 1, 2025. So I'm open for any questions and or discussion of options 1 or 2.
I have a question. Until I see other hands, let me just throw this one out. I guess option 1 would take it to the board. Option 2 would be entirely with staff. And I'm wondering whether a third option of staff recommendation to the finance committee was considered, and if there advantages to going either of those other directions, because that seems like sort of a middle thing where a lot of this type of stuff might typically get done. And the first one doesn't include it. Let's see. The first one doesn't seem to include the superintendent's recommendations, although I would expect that would be part of it, that staff in following the panel or presenting the panel discussion would also weigh in, which I think would be valuable. But I'm curious whether that was contemplated in option 1, and then whether sort of that third option was considered and decided that there was less advantageous than the others.
So generally, we don't dictate things to the board on how the board does things in rule, because the rule is really meant to or be about the law for others, including the superintendent. So if you look on lines 46 through 49, you'll see that although it says the superintendent shall provide the panel's recommendation described to the board by January 10th, for the board's evaluation and approval, you can see I put there that board leadership could then determine whether the recommendations are evaluated by a committee first or evaluated and approved by the board without a committee recommendation. But we wouldn't dictate that in the rule either way. We wouldn't prescribe that it has to go to the committee or that it has to go to the board. I also didn't want to say that the board shall approve these by, February 1 or February 15th, because it's essentially creating a law for yourself. And we know that sometimes things take longer, and especially once it goes to a board committee or the full board, you may not take action by January 15th or February 1, versus if it's staff. And the other thing I wanted to mention is the superintendent essentially is the superintendent or superintendent's designee is on the panel. So that's why I stated that, I can't say this as a for sure guarantee, but if it were the superintendent then making those approvals, they'd probably just go with the panel's recommendation. But if it goes to the board, the reason why the board would want it is if the board thinks or wants to make a different decision other than the panel's recommendations. I mean, the other thing you could put in there is the superintendent shall essentially use or distribute the funding based on the panel's recommendations, you know, so that it's the panel made that decision and it's not that the superintendent is going to overrule it, because that's not what I imagine the staff would do. I don't think they would overrule it. It's more about whether the board wants to look at the panel's recommendations and then potentially make a decision different than the panel.
Well, thank you. And I guess just to put a finer point on it, my one thought is there an option that would the superintendent or staff presents simply to a committee and committee approves or rejects? You know, we have both ends of the spectrum. It's only staff or it's the full board. And I wonder whether that's just an interim step that makes it easy to say, hey, here's what they recommended. We think it's good or we think it's bad, and the committee can do it without having to engage the full board. I'm just curious if there's an advantage or disadvantage that part wasn't an option.
The board, a committee can't bind the board. FYI.
Right. Yeah, but in this case, there's an option that doesn't include anybody on the board, at least as I understand number 2. That would not involve the board, right?
Well, the committee can't give a green light.
Okay. So that, thank you, that helps. So that interim step actually doesn't work. You either have to have staff delegate entirely to staff to make the determination or go to the full board. It could not be something that comes up for approval to a committee.
But it can go through a committee and into the board. The big question is timeline and timing. How many months? Then that's what Superintendent Stallings saying is create that in rule and not have the superintendent have the final approval, or a longer process as it goes before the full board, which most likely it will go through a committee first.
Okay, so
but I've got to jump on I'm sorry, I've got to go at noon. So I just want to say thank you to everybody, but.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you much. Okay. Just Angie, if I could follow up, I guess what I'm hearing from Chair Huntsman is that the intermediate step of going to a committee for a quick review and approval is not doable under our rules, that a committee would have to then take it to the full board. I was looking for something that had the efficiency of not going 2 rounds with the board and giving deference to our staff and the panel with just a little element of oversight and review to say, yes, looks good, or somebody has concerns in committee. That might be a mix of, you know what I'm saying, the flexibility with at least that level of oversight. But am I hearing Chair Huntsman correctly that that's not a valid procedure under our board rules?
It's generally not something we've ever done, and it would subject the committee to open and public meetings and some other things, because now you would become the decision maker. I think the easiest thing would be to just delete everything from 46 on, you know, just do that lines 43 through 45. And then that would allow the board, once it comes to the board, it's really, then it would be up to board leadership to decide whether expediency is necessary and it goes straight to the board, or whether it goes to a committee or not. I don't think you need to be explicit about whether it goes to committee or not in the rule, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. And I didn't want to jump ahead of choosing one or the other, just wanted to see what options were and weren't included. Vice Chair Norton. Sorry, you're muted.
Man, I'm having a hard time with that today. First of all, I have a question. First of all, I have a question, and then I just have a comment on this process. My question is over on line 71. It appears to me, and I just wanted to clarify this, that this can either be a grant or a loan. Is that correct?
That's almost word for word what it says in 53F 10302.
Okay. That's important. My next question, I guess, would you imagine, based on the information in the application that's basically outlined on 34 to 40, that this panel is going to be heavily influenced by finance staff, as is the revolving loan panel, for instance.
So I can pull up the section of code, and maybe I should ask Cami to let me go ahead and share. Would you like me to share with you the panel's makeup?
That would be great. Thank you.
I will do that right now. Thank you, Cami. All right. So here's the panel makeup right here. And hopefully you can all see this well. The panel consists of the following members: the state superintendent of public instruction, or the state superintendent's designee, who serves as the chair; the deputy superintendent for financial operations, or his or her designee; two individuals with expertise in schools construction, which the state superintendent appoints; two individuals with construction and construction financing experience, at least one of whom being an employee of the division. I believe that's the Division of Facilities Construct, DCFM, who the governor appoints; and then the state treasurer, or the state treasurer's designee, only in the case of panel action regarding a loan, if it becomes a loan.
Okay.
So, and maybe Scott or Superintendent Dixon, that might be a better question for you to answer that.
Feel free if anybody else wants to address this, unless, did that answer the question? Was that from Vice Chair Norton? I apologize.
Yeah, that answered my question.
Okay. Well, if that answers, let's move on. We are at 12 o'clock, but this is important. And so unless anybody else has to leave for competing obligations, we can probably take a couple more questions and take action here. Are we okay? So I see Superintendent Dixon's hand up though. Oh, there we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm reflecting back on the role of the board, and I think you had the committee question addressed, but I'm wondering, Deputy Stallings, you talked about perhaps taking out 46 through 49, which is kind of unusual to be in a rule anyway. It seems, I know that's like a placeholder to think about it, but I was also thinking an option two, it would be easy to add, the superintendent shall evaluate the panel's recommendations as described, and then a B, replacing current B with a different B that said, report the recommendations to the board. And it still keeps the line of the superintendent approving them, but reporting to the board, you could say report to the board and accept revisions or something. And then, so it's not necessarily an approval process, but it's just a way to insert a role for the board so that the board shows up in both option 1 and 2. Over.
If you're asking me if that's possible, yes, I think that would be workable. And I'm just trying to get my document to save so that I don't inadvertently, I'm trying to create a draft 2, and so that we can just draft this as we go. And I think I'm there now. So let me share. Chair, would you like me to start mocking up what Superintendent Dixon just proposed?
We could. Maybe if I could turn to Member Hutchings first. I want to make sure we hear from everybody with questions or concerns.
Yeah, I was also trying to think through if we're looking for an intermediate option. I think that's a good one that Superintendent Dixon suggested. I raised my hand earlier because I was thinking another option might be to consider a dollar amount. If it's going to be a certain amount or lower, then the superintendent could just approve what the panel suggests. If it's going to be a higher dollar amount, then maybe it goes to the board. So just trying to brainstorm some options.
Gotcha. Superintendent Stallings, any thoughts on that option of a
I think
threshold amount?
Yeah, what we could do is maybe, sorry, and I hope you don't mind, I'm going to kind of group draft right now. What we could do is keep 3 and then say the superintendent shall provide the panel's recommendations for any project above, a certain amount described by that date. And then we change this to a 4 and say for a small capital project below, whatever that amount is. You could do that. Or we could also have a report be in here, add the reporting even for those lower amounts, come to the board. And this subject to the amounts, and maybe what we could put here is change this to subject to the approval of the board, distribute funds to eligible school district by March 1, with the hope that whatever the board reviews would also be done by March 1, but just kind of having that acknowledgement that if it's subject to board approval, that it may or may not make the March 1 date. I don't know what you think about that.
That seems to make sense to me. Any other board member comments or concerns about that modification? So that would include a threshold to take to the board. I guess it sounds like we can't only go to committee, but we would go to the board in limited circumstances. Otherwise, superintendent would review and approve and provide us a report on action of either approval or rejection for each applicant, correct, by the stated date of March 1st.
That blue in just a minute. Oh, I don't know what I just did there. I apologize.
No, thank you for moving it along.
So, and I will make sure these are in the correct colors later. So unfortunately, right now, I don't have not as skillful on the fly of fixing, but when we do draft 2, I'll make sure that anything that we've changed in committee today will be in red or blue. Oh dear. Of course. What's happened, I apologize, is there's a link to it. It's got a link to a section of code right there. And so it keeps, when I'm touching it, it's doing that, but let's fix this. So what do you think about, what is that threshold that you'd like to include? I don't even know. I don't know if Sam or Scott have any ideas of what these capital project amounts might be. Would it be if it's over $1 million? Just trying to think what makes sense.
Any thoughts there from Sam or Scott?
Yeah, I would say at least $1 million and more likely $2 million would be appropriate there. It's not likely that the LEA will go to this level of effort for something below that threshold. So that I'd recommend at least $2 million.
Any board member questions or comments on that suggestion for the amendment?
I like it.
That looks like a pretty reasonable solution. Any other thoughts or comments? Or are we ready to take something under consideration?
I think we're ready.
Okay. Are you interested in bringing a motion?
Yes. Just
Turn
pulling
to
it
Vice
up.
Chair Norton.
Board
Okay.
Member Norton, you'd want to just say either draft 1 as amended or draft 2, either way.
Okay. I move that the committee approve R277-125 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
As amended. Correct. Did you say draft
Well,
1?
draft 2 is the amendment.
You said draft 2.
I can do.
Never mind. Your motion was perfect. I attempted to mess it up, but that shouldn't affect anything. I think we're ready to vote. Board members, please vote. Okay, and we've excused Chair Huntsman, and so that vote is unanimous of the 4 present members. Thank you for quick editing and a good solid solution. So with that, I think we are concluded. unless Deputy Superintendent Jones, there's any final item of informational business?
Chair Moss,
Yes. Oh, Deborah.
sorry. Deputy Jones had a prior engagement and had to step away. So,
Okay.
I
Assistant
think this could-
Superintendent Jacobson, are we good to go? Are we clear?
yes, we are clear.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you much for working
Thank
through all
you.
of that. We are adjourned.
Got a big job done today. Good job.
Yeah. Thank you.